Hey friends. Glad you're here at Super Harry. We've cooked up something special. What if Harry collapsed during Quidditch and St. Mungo discovered 31 illegal soul fragments implanted? Liking and subscribing really helps us out. Okay, story time. Chapter 1. The morning of the Gryffindor vs Slytherin match arrived with the kind of cold that had teeth in it, the sort that crept under robes and settled into bones before anyone had finished breakfast. Harry ate without tasting anything. Across the Great Hall, Draco Malfoy was holding court at the Slytherin table, laughing at something that was probably cruel, and Harry watched him for a moment before looking away. He had bigger things to think about. "You've barely touched your eggs," Hermione said, not looking up from the book balanced against her pumpkin juice. "I'm not hungry." "You're playing in 2 hours." "I know when I'm playing, Hermione." Ron looked up from his own plate, which he had cleared twice already. "She's right though, mate. You look a bit pale." "I always look pale. Paler than usual." Ron studied him with that particular expression he got when he was genuinely concerned but trying to look casual about it. "You sleep all right?" Harry had not slept all right. He'd woken at 3 in the morning with a headache so severe it had taken him 10 minutes to remember where he was, lying in the dark of the 6th-year dormitory pressing the heels of his hands against his eyes while his scar burned and something else, something he had no name for, had churned in the center of his chest like a second heartbeat stuttering out of rhythm. He'd told himself it was nerves. He'd been telling himself that for 3 weeks. "Fine," he said. Hermione finally looked up from her book. She looked at him the way she sometimes looked at a problem she hadn't quite solved yet, like she was cataloging details. He took a deliberate bite of toast. "Eat," she said, and went back to reading. The locker room smelled like grass and old leather and Ginny Weasley's pre-match ritual of rubbing something that smelled like eucalyptus on her wrists, which she swore improved her grip and which everyone else swore was just a nervous habit. The team pulled on their robes with the particular charged energy of people who had been waiting for something and could finally stop waiting. Dean Thomas had borrowed Ron's Gryffindor scarf and tied it to the end of his wand, which Ron found both touching and slightly weird. Seamus had written Potter in red paint on his forearm, which Harry only saw when Seamus rolled up his sleeve to gesture wildly during a conversation about bludger angles. "That's not coming off for a week," Harry told him. Seamus looked at his arm. "Worth it." Harry laughed, and it felt real, which was good. The laughter helped. He put on his gloves, flexed his fingers inside them, and told himself the tightness in his chest was anticipation. Angelina Johnson gave the pre-match speech. She was fierce and specific and called Slytherin exactly what she thought of them without any diplomatic softening, and the team responded with the kind of collective energy that made the locker room feel like a pressure vessel about to pop. Harry mounted his firebolt and felt the familiar shift, the way everything went quiet when he was on a broom. Whatever else was happening in his body, whatever strange dissonance had been troubling his sleep for weeks, it always went quiet when he flew. He had always thought of flying as escape. Today, in retrospect, he would understand that it had also been relief from a pressure he hadn't known was building. They flew out into the gray October morning to a wall of sound from the stands. The match started the way all Quidditch matches started, chaos dressed up as sport. Harry climbed immediately, pulling the firebolt into a steep banking loop above the general mayhem while below him chasers carved through the air and the first bludger cracked off Slytherin's keeper's shoulder and sent him spinning. Lee Jordan was commentating with the enthusiasm of a man who had been waiting all term for this, and his voice rose and fell across the pitch in a running stream of cheerful bias that Professor McGonagall was ineffectively trying to moderate. "And Ginny Weasley takes the quaffle, absolutely brilliant move there, completely faking out Flint who is, in my personal opinion, built like a wardrobe and moves like one too, Jordan." "Sorry, Professor, I only meant a very agile wardrobe." Harry was 50 feet above the rest of the play, turning slow circles, his eyes moving across the pitch in the pattern he developed over 6 years of searching for a small winged ball against large complicated backgrounds. The snitch was not near the goalposts. Not near the commentary box. He felt it before he saw it, that particular prickling at the edge of his vision that meant a flash of gold, there. Near the Gryffindor stands, hovering roughly level with the third row, small and perfectly still in the way that meant it hadn't noticed him yet. He shifted his weight and the firebolt responded instantly, nosing down into a dive that ate up the distance in seconds. The crowd noise changed pitch as they saw him move. He heard Lee's voice spike upward. The snitch shivered, seeming to sense the incoming threat, and darted sideways. Harry adjusted without thinking. Left. Down. There, he stretched out his right hand, gloved fingers spread, the firebolt screaming beneath him at a speed that made the air a solid thing, and then something happened inside his chest that was not a bludger, not an impact, not anything external at all. It was like every bone in his ribcage decided simultaneously to flex inward. A pressure so complete and sudden that for a moment he genuinely did not know whether he'd been hit. His right hand, reaching for the snitch, stopped reaching. His grip on the broom handle loosened. He heard himself make a sound he didn't recognize, not quite a gasp, not quite a cry, something more involuntary than either of those things. The firebolt, responding to his lost grip, began to tumble. Later, people would describe it differently depending on where they'd been sitting. Ginny said she'd seen his whole body go rigid before the fall. Ron said he'd looked like the lights had gone out behind his eyes. Hermione, who had been watching from the stands with the focused attention she brought to everything, said she'd known before he started falling, something in the way he'd reached for the snitch and then simply stopped, mid-motion, like a clock whose spring had snapped. What Harry experienced in those seconds was harder to describe. The pressure in his chest exploded outward from a central point, and in that explosion there was something like noise, not sound, not exactly, but the sensation of many separate things trying to be heard at once, overlapping and discordant, a cacophony of presences that lived in the space between thought and feeling. He had been aware of it before, on bad nights, in the dark. He had never felt it all at once. It was, he would try to explain later, like being in a room where 30 people were all talking simultaneously in different languages and then having someone turn the volume up to a level that wasn't compatible with remaining conscious. He fell 40 feet. The cushioning charms on the pitch, maintained by Hogwarts groundskeeping magic and renewed at the start of every term, absorbed the worst of it. He hit the grass and bounced once, slightly, and lay still. The stadium went quiet in the horrible way stadiums go quiet. Then everyone started moving at once. Madame Hooch reached him first, skidding to a stop on her broom and dropping to her knees beside him. He was breathing, that was the first thing she established, loudly enough that the people running across the pitch toward her could hear it. His eyes were open, which seemed promising, until she looked at them and realized he wasn't seeing anything. His glasses had come off in the fall. His scar was the color of a fresh burn. Harry. She put a hand on his shoulder. Harry, can you hear me? His lips moved. What? She leaned down. 31, he said, or she thought he said, which made no sense at all. Then Madame Pomfrey arrived at a dead run with her wand already out, her healers training overtaking the general panic with the authority of someone who had dealt with every variety of Quidditch injury across 4 decades and was not about to let anyone fall apart in her immediate vicinity. She was running diagnostics before she'd fully stopped moving, the spells casting pale blue light across Harry's face and chest, and the look that crossed her expression when she read the results was not the focused concern of someone dealing with a fall. It was something else. Something quieter and more alarmed. "We need a port key," she said. Her voice was completely level. Which was how Ron, arriving at a sprint with Hermione 2 steps behind him, knew it was serious. Madame Pomfrey did not stay level when things were fine. "What's wrong with him?" Ron demanded. "I need a port key to St. Mungo's, Mr. Weasley. Immediately." Poppy. McGonagall materialized from the direction of the teacher's box, her tartan robes snapping in the cold air, her face composed in the particular way that meant she was holding herself together through sheer force of will. "What are we dealing with?" Madame Pomfrey looked at her colleague and something passed between them, some communication too quick and too professional for the surrounding students to read. "Something outside my facility's scope," she said quietly. I need to get him to specialists. McGonagall had the portkey organized in under 3 minutes, a speed that Harry would later appreciate but could not appreciate at the time because he was not, in any meaningful sense, present for the process. He was conscious, he could hear voices, feel hands moving him, feel the cold of the grass, but the noise inside his chest was still happening, less explosive now but constant, and whatever it was taking up most of his available attention. He felt the hook pull of the portkey. He heard Hermione's voice saying his name, sharp with a fear she wasn't hiding. He felt something cool against his hand and realized Hermione had grabbed it, and that Ron had grabbed his other arm, and that they had apparently both decided to portkey with him without being invited or asking permission, which was so perfectly them that it almost made him smile. Almost. St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries received him in the emergency intake of the 4th floor, spell damage, on a Thursday morning in October with a chaos that was unusual even by St. Mungo's standards. The healers on duty had barely processed the arrival before Madame Pomfrey was thrusting her diagnostic parchment at whoever looked most senior and saying 3 words that cleared the immediate area of anything non-essential. The 3 words were, core anomaly, multiple. The healer who caught the parchment was a woman in her mid-40s with short graying hair and the look of someone who had been doing difficult things for a long time and had made peace with that. Her name was Miriam Stroud. She was the head of magical core assessment at St. Mungo's, and she had been called in on her day off by a trainee who had taken one look at the diagnostic readings and decided, correctly, that this was above their pay grade. She'd arrived 20 minutes before Harry had, still in her outdoor coat, and had been reviewing the preliminary readings with the focused calm of a woman who had genuinely seen everything. She looked at the parchment Madame Pomfrey handed her. She looked at it for a long time. "Where is he?" she said. Harry was in assessment room 3, on a bed that was crisp and white and very different from the Hogwarts hospital wing, which at least smelled familiar. The room was small and well lit with the particular magical lighting that cast no shadows, which was useful for medical examination and deeply unsettling for everyone else. He'd been moved from the floor to the bed and someone had replaced his glasses, and he was now capable of looking at the ceiling and thinking, which was more than he'd managed for the last 15 minutes. Ron and Hermione sat on opposite sides of his bed. Ron was doing the thing where he was very carefully not showing how scared he was by being very busy, adjusting the blanket, checking the window, sitting back down, while Hermione was doing the opposite, sitting completely still with both hands folded in her lap and her eyes on Harry's face with an intensity that was both comforting and slightly unnerving. "I'm all right," Harry said. "You fell 40 feet, Ron said. Cushioning charms." "Harry." Hermione's voice was careful. Madame Pomfrey used the phrase, core anomaly, multiple. "Do you know what that means?" "No." "It refers to irregularities in a witch or wizard's magical core. Anomalies are things that shouldn't be there. Multiple means," she paused. "It means more than one." He thought about the noise he'd heard inside his chest during the fall. The 30 voices in 30 languages. "How many constitutes multiple?" he asked. Hermione opened her mouth, and that was when Healer Stroud came through the door. She moved like someone used to walking into rooms where the situation was already difficult. She had a second parchment in her hand now. She'd been running preliminary assessment spells on his readings from the corridor, and she shut the door behind her with the particular care of someone who wanted it closed but didn't want to create alarm by slamming it. She looked at Harry with the direct, evaluative look of a professional, and then she looked at Ron and Hermione. "Family?" she asked. "Friends," Hermione said. "We'd like to stay, please." "That's up to him." She looked at Harry. "They stay," Harry said. She nodded once, pulled the chair from the corner of the room, set it beside his bed, and sat down. This struck Harry as significant. Most medical professionals stood. Sitting meant she was planning to take her time. "I'm Healer Stroud," she said. "I'm going to ask you some questions first, and then I'm going to explain what we're looking at. Is that all right?" "Sure." "Have you been experiencing any of the following in the past few months: unusual headaches, chest pressure or tightness, periods of disorientation, hearing sounds or voices with no external source, emotional responses that felt disproportionate or as though they weren't quite yours. Harry was quiet for a moment. Hermione had gone very still across from him. Most of those, he said. Did you report any of them to a healer or to your school medic? I thought it was stress. How long has this been happening? He thought about it honestly. Longer than a few months, he said. I think it's been happening for years. It's just been getting worse. Stroud wrote something on her parchment. Her expression was professionally neutral in the way that wasn't actually neutral at all, it was someone keeping something contained. All right, she said. I'm going to run the full assessment now. It takes about 10 minutes, it won't hurt, and I want you to stay still and tell me if anything feels unusual. Can you do that? What are you looking for? Hermione asked. Stroud looked at her. What's your name? Hermione Granger. You're the Granger girl. Top of your year. It wasn't a question. Sit closer to the bed, Miss Granger. You should see this. It was an unusual thing for a healer to say to a patient's friend rather than the patient himself, and all three of them noticed it. Hermione moved her chair without comment. What Stroud did next was methodical and almost meditative. She cast 10 separate diagnostic spells in sequence, each one producing a different quality of light above Harry's chest. Some were blue, one was a pale gold, two were a shade of violet that Harry had never seen associated with healing magic. She read each result with the careful attention of someone cross-referencing. She did not say anything for the full 10 minutes. When the last spell dissolved, she lowered her wand and looked at the parchment again. She was quiet for long enough that Ron broke first. What? He said. What is it? Just say it. Stroud put the parchment on the bed where Harry could see it. The numbers and symbols on it meant nothing to him, but Hermione leaned in, and the color slowly left her face. Harry, Stroud said, are you familiar with the concept of a soul fragment? He thought about Voldemort. About the way Dumbledore had been circling around something for 2 years. About a diary and a ring and a locket and conversations that had been almost complete without ever quite arriving at their conclusion. He said carefully. A soul fragment is a portion of a human soul that has been deliberately separated from its original host and implanted into another living magical being, Stroud said. It can be done intentionally by the host themselves, Horcrux magic, although creating one is highly illegal, or it can be done to a third party without their knowledge or consent. The latter is substantially rarer, because the spellwork involved is extraordinarily complex. She paused. It is also, under Clause 18 of the International Statute of Sorceress Practice, a class of magical violation, carrying a minimum sentence of life in Azkaban per fragment. The room was very quiet. Per fragment, Harry repeated. Per fragment. She looked at him steadily. Harry, I am going to tell you a number, and I need you to hear it I need you to stay with me while I explain what it means and what we're going to do about it. He looked back at her with the same steadiness. Whatever was going to come next, he was not, he decided, going to fall apart about it. He was done being the person who absorbed terrible information with his whole body. Tell me. The full assessment is showing 31 distinct soul fragments implanted in your magical core. Ron knocked his chair back, standing up so fast it crashed against the wall. Hermione's hands pressed flat against the bed as though she needed something solid. Harry felt nothing move in his face. Inside his chest, the noise he'd been hearing for years continued its low, constant pressure, 31 separate things, 31 separate voices, and for the first time he was not confused about what it was. He was something else. He was very, very clear. How long have they been there? He asked. Stroud's expression showed something that might have been relief, the particular relief of a professional who has delivered a catastrophic diagnosis and found that the patient, against all odds, was not going to shatter. The oldest fragments show magical calcification consistent with implantation approximately 15 years ago, she said. The most recent are less than 6 months old. 15 years, he said. I was one. Or shortly after. Hermione made a sound that wasn't a word. Who? Ron started, then stopped, then started again. Who would? How many people? 31 means 31 different, not necessarily, Stroud said. One individual could implant multiple fragments, though the magical toll on the original soul makes repeated soul-splitting extraordinarily dangerous. What we're looking at suggests multiple sources, but the full analysis will take time. She paused. I want to be honest with you about something, Harry. Go on. I've been a healer for 23 years. I have never seen this. Not one fragment without consent. I've seen one, once, as a student, in a victim of a dark wizard who was subsequently imprisoned. Never 31. The scale of what was done to you is not something I have reference for. She said it without melodrama, just plainly, because he deserved plainness. What I do have reference for is how to treat it. You can remove them. Yes. The process is called fragmentary excision, and it's delicate and it requires more than one session, but yes. We can take them out. She paused. What you'll need to understand is that 31 foreign soul fragments have been living in your magical core, in some cases for 15 years. They've been, to use a simple analogy, taking up space. Adding noise. Suppressing your own magical expression. When we remove them, you will feel different. You may feel very different. Your magic will likely expand, Hermione said quietly. Stroud looked at her. Yes. That's exactly right. Into the space they were occupying. Yes. Harry watched Hermione's face move through the calculation. He could almost hear her brain going. He felt something that was not exactly calm but was adjacent to it, the feeling of a thing coming clear, something finally having a name. I want to start today, he said. Harry, Ron started. I want to start today, he repeated, not loudly, not angrily, just as a fact. He looked at Stroud. What do I need to do? She studied him for a moment. Then she nodded, with the quiet respect of one professional acknowledging another. You'll need to sign consent forms, I'll handle those. I'll need to notify the hospital board, which is standard for a case of this complexity. And I'll need to send a notification to your school's headmaster, no. The word was out before he'd decided on it, clean and immediate. Stroud didn't look surprised. That's your legal right as a patient over the age of 14 under the Magical Medical Privacy Act. She made a note. I'll need a guardian or a trusted adult present during the procedure, however. It's protocol. I want Remus Lupin, Harry said. I know who Remus Lupin is, Stroud said. Can you contact him? I can, Hermione said, already reaching for her bag, already 3 steps ahead, which was Hermione. Then we'll begin this afternoon. Stroud stood. I'll give you a few minutes. She moved toward the door and paused. Harry. I want to say something, and it's not a medical statement, it's just something I want you to hear. She turned back. What was done to you is one of the most profound violations I can imagine. You have every right to be furious. But you also need to know that we are going to fix it. All 31. We're going to take every single one of them out of you, and what's left will be entirely yours. Completely and only yours. She paused. That matters. She left. The door clicked softly shut behind her. Ron immediately sat on the edge of the bed. He didn't say anything. He just sat there, close enough that his shoulder pressed against Harry's, the way Ron dealt with things he didn't have words for, which was by being physically present. Harry appreciated it in a way he didn't express. 31, Hermione said. Her voice was doing something complicated. Yeah. Harry, I need you to find out who's behind it, he said. All of them. I want names. He looked at her. I know that's what you're already planning to do. She didn't deny it. Healer Stroud said the analysis takes time. But I can start cross-referencing the magical signatures once they're extracted, Hermione. He caught her when she was about to spiral into research mode. Write to Remus first. She breathed. Nodded. Right. Yes. Remus first. The letter took 3 minutes and was sent by St. Mungo's owl with urgent flagged on the outside, which was apparently a magical hospital code that guaranteed delivery within the hour. While they waited, Harry lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling and let the information settle. 23 years, Stroud had said, and she'd never seen this. 15 years for the oldest ones. He had been 1 year old. Someone had reached into a 1-year-old child's magical core and planted something foreign in it. He noticed he wasn't shocked. He noticed that more than anything. He was angry. He could feel the anger as a specific thing, contained and clear, not the explosive kind that came in flashes during arguments with Snape or Malfoy but the slower, hotter kind that was going to need somewhere to go eventually, but he was not shocked. Some part of him had been waiting for this. Not this exactly, not this specific terrible truth, but some version of it. Some explanation for the noise. Some answer to the question of why he had always felt, in the deepest and quietest parts of himself, like he was carrying more than he was supposed to. 31 things that aren't mine, he said to the ceiling. Yes, Hermione said. What's left, then, when they're gone? She was quiet for a moment. Then, you. He thought about that. Across the room, Ron was doing something with the curtain that probably didn't need doing, his broad shoulders set in a tense way that meant he was holding something in. Oi, Ron, Harry said. Ron turned. Sit down. Stop fussing with the curtain. Ron came and sat on the other side of the bed. For a while none of them spoke, and in the silence the sounds of the hospital filtered through, voices in corridors, the distant movement of trolleys, the particular quality of a large building full of people dealing with difficult things. Harry closed his eyes. The noise in his chest was still there. But for the first time in as long as he could remember, it didn't feel like something wrong. It felt like something that was going to be fixed. Who would do this? Ron said finally, quietly, like he was afraid of the answer. Multiple people, Harry said. That's what she said. Multiple people over 15 years. Ron's jaw was tight. That means it wasn't just you know who. Someone else. Someone who had access to you. When you were, he stopped. When I was a baby, Harry said. And after. Dumbledore, Hermione said, very quietly. The name sat in the room like something dropped. Neither Harry nor Ron argued with it. That was the worst part. We don't know yet, Harry said. Wait for Stroud's analysis. Wait for the fragments to come out. Then we'll know. And then? Ron asked. Harry opened his eyes. Then we deal with it. It wasn't a vague statement. There was nothing vague in his voice when he said it. Ron and Hermione both heard the difference. This wasn't Harry bracing himself for something, wasn't Harry gathering himself to survive another blow. It was Harry telling them something was going to happen because he was going to make it happen, and the particular quality of the certainty in his voice made Ron blink and Hermione sit back in her chair. Something had already changed. They could both feel it. Remus Lupin arrived 47 minutes later. He came through the door looking like a man who had run for at least part of the distance. His coat was unbuttoned, his scarf was wrong, and he had the look of someone who had read an urgent letter and managed to be afraid and controlled about it at the same time, which was a very Lupin way to exist. He took in the scene, Harry upright and apparently functional, Ron and Hermione on either side of the bed, the clinical blankness of Assessment Room 3, and something in his face settled. You're all right, he said, to Harry. Not exactly, Harry said. But I will be. Sit down, Remus. There's a lot to tell you. Lupin sat. He listened. He was very good at listening, it was one of the things Harry had always appreciated about him, the quality of his attention when something important was being said. He didn't interrupt. He didn't make the large shocked sounds that Ron made. He just listened, with his hands folded and his eyes steady and his expression doing something very quiet and very complicated, and when Harry finished with 31, Remus Lupin closed his eyes briefly and pressed a hand to his mouth. When he opened them again they were bright in a way that had nothing to do with tears and everything to do with the particular look of someone who has just realized they should have known something sooner. "How long?" he said, not a question. "Oldest ones are 15 years, Harry said. Remus made a sound that was barely audible. His hands dropped to his knees. "Harry, I'm not looking for apologies," Harry said. "Not unkindly. Just clearly. Not from you. What I need is for you to be present for the extraction process this afternoon, which apparently requires a trusted adult. Are you up for that?" Lupin looked at him, really looked at him, the way people looked when they were noticing something different and hadn't placed it yet. Whatever he saw in Harry's face made his expression shift from guilt into something more focused. "Yes," he said. "Absolutely. Whatever you need." "Good." Harry pushed himself to sit up fully. "Hermione. When Stroud comes back, I want you to ask her about the signature analysis process. I want to understand the methodology before she starts the extractions, not because I don't trust her, but because I want to know exactly what we're looking at." "Already planning to," Hermione said. "Ron." Ron looked up. "Will you owl your mum?" "Not because I need her here," he said this firmly, because he knew exactly how Molly Weasley responded to information like this and right now he needed the room to be functional, not emotionally saturated, but because she deserves to know. And she'll want to know before the rumors start. "The rumors," Ron said. "Right. The whole school watched you fall. Which means by now the whole school is talking. Your mum should hear it from us first." Ron nodded, looking at him strangely. You're being very, what? Calm. Would it help if I wasn't?" Ron paused. "No. I just..." He looked at Harry for a moment. "You're different." "A little," Harry agreed. "Even since this morning. Maybe." He thought about it. "Or maybe this morning was just the first time I had a reason to think about it clearly." Stroud returned with the consent forms and 2 other healers and an expression that said she'd been doing preparation work since she left the room. She handed Harry a parchment, and he read every word of it before signing, all 3 pages, which Stroud noted with visible approval. She explained the procedure again, this time with more technical detail because Hermione was present and asking precise questions, and the exchange between the 2 of them had the particular rapid-fire quality of 2 very smart people who had established immediate intellectual respect. "Each fragment will be drawn out separately," Stroud explained, demonstrating a small blue light spell on her own palm. "We work from least calcified to most, newest to oldest. The oldest fragments are the most integrated with your core and will take longer. Each extraction produces a brief but significant sensation, pressure, heat, disorientation, and afterwards a feeling of absence," Harry said. Stroud looked at him. "More like space," she said. "Specifically, like space that was always supposed to be yours." He signed the forms. Remus signed as the witnessing adult. The 2 additional healers, both specialists, Stroud introduced them as healers Chen and Okafor, began setting up the assessment equipment, which was considerably more elaborate than what Stroud had used initially, standing rings of spelled glass, a large flat diagnostic mirror, and something that looked like a combination of a pensieve and a compass that Harry had never seen and that Hermione was clearly fighting not to ask about. "That's a fracture compass," Stroud told her, because she'd noticed Hermione staring. "It maps soul boundaries. It'll show us exactly where each fragment begins and ends relative to his natural core." She looked at Harry. "You'll want to see this. Can you tolerate seeing your own core mapped? Is that strange? It can be confronting." I think, Harry said, more actions request aborted. Write the next chapter now. Fractured Soul Chapter 2, 31. I think, Harry said, that at this point I'm past being confronted by anything. Stroud gave him a look that said she'd heard that before. She also didn't argue with it, which Harry appreciated. The fracture compass activated with a low resonant hum that Harry felt more than heard, a vibration in his back teeth and behind his sternum that wasn't unpleasant so much as deeply strange, like the frequency of a very large bell struck very close. The device was positioned at the foot of his bed, its brass and glass components turning in slow independent rotations, and when Heelerchen directed the primary lens toward Harry's chest, the diagnostic mirror on the wall filled with light. It was a map. His map. He'd expected something clinical, charts, numbers, the sort of medical imagery that meant nothing without a degree to interpret it. What the fracture compass produced was not that. The mirror showed a sphere of deep blue-white light that pulsed with his heartbeat, steady and bright, and embedded in it like shrapnel were 31 separate fragments, each one a different shade of the wrong color, some bruised purple, some a dull corroded gray, one a particular shade of red-black that made Hermione inhale sharply when she saw it, scattered through the blue-white glow like stones thrown into water. That's your magical core, Stroud said, for Remus's benefit. The blue-white is native. Everything else is foreign. Remus was looking at the mirror with an expression that had moved past quiet complication into something harder. His hands, Harry noticed, had tightened on his knees. The red-black one, Hermione said. Is that the oldest? Second oldest, Stroud said. The oldest is that one. She indicated a fragment near the center of the sphere, so deep inside the structure of Harry's core it had practically grown into it, gray-green and ancient-looking compared to everything else. 16 years of calcification. It's the most integrated. We'll do that one last. What's the red-black one? Harry asked. Stroud was quiet for a moment. It has a particularly aggressive magical signature. Dense. It's been suppressing magic in its immediate proximity rather than just occupying space. Think of the others as stones blocking a river, the river still flows around them. That one is more like a dam section. She glanced at him. We'll get to it in the second or third session. You'll notice a significant change after that one comes out. Harry looked at it in the mirror. At the dark intrusive shape sitting in his own light. Let's start, he said. The first extraction was the newest fragment, and Stroud had told him it would be easier than the ones that followed, and she was correct in the technical sense and significantly understating it in the practical sense. What Harry experienced during the extraction of Fragment 1 was the sensation of something being carefully, precisely, and completely removed from a place in his chest that had not been empty in his memory. The spell work was slow. Stroud worked with the focused exactness of a surgeon, guiding the fragment with a series of tiny precise wand movements while Heelerchen monitored the mirror and called out readings in a low steady voice, and when it came free it landed in the collection vessel Healer Okafor was holding with a small, distinct clink. Harry felt the space it left behind like a first breath after being held underwater. All right? Stroud asked. Yes, he said. And then, because it was true and he hadn't expected it, that was, yes. She nodded like she'd heard that before too. The sensation of absence will integrate in a few minutes. Your magic will expand to fill it. Are you ready to continue? How many can you do today? Comfortably. 8. Maybe 10 if your core is responding well. Do 10. Hermione made a small sound from her corner. Harry, Remus started. I've been walking around with 31 of these things, Harry said pleasantly. I would quite like to walk around with 21. 10 extractions, then I'll rest. Is that medically reasonable? He asked Stroud. She considered. 10 is at the upper edge of what I'd recommend for a first session. But your core signature is unusually strong, stronger than I'd expect, actually, given the suppression load. If you remain stable through the first 5, I'm comfortable with 10. Then 10. He settled back. Let's keep going. Ron, who had been very quiet from his chair in the corner, spoke up. "Can I ask something?" Stroud looked at him. The fragments. After they're out. What happens to them?" "They deteriorate," Stroud said. "A soul fragment separated from its host and without a vessel to sustain it loses coherence within hours. By tomorrow morning, they'll be gone. Effectively." Ron let out a breath. "Good," he said, with a quiet viciousness that Harry found enormously comforting. Extractions 2 through 5 went faster than the first. Stroud's pace was methodical, almost musical, the spells worked in sequence had a rhythm to them, and Harry found if he breathed to the rhythm he could manage the sensation more cleanly. Each one felt different. Fragment 2 came out with a cold release, like a window opening in winter. Fragment 3 pulled at something emotional when it left, not his emotion, something else's, an anger that had never been his that dissolved as soon as the fragment cleared his skin. He told Stroud about that one. She wrote it down without expression, but her pen pressed harder against the parchment. Fragment 5 was painful. Not agonizingly so, but genuinely, specifically painful in a way the others hadn't been, a deep ache that radiated from his sternum outward and made him grip the bed rail with one hand. Stroud noticed and paused. Pain level. Manageable. "I need a number." 5. 6. She adjusted the approach, a different wand angle, a support spell from healer Chen, and when Fragment 5 came free, the pain went with it, immediately and completely. In its place was warmth, spreading outward from the site of extraction like the first swallow of butterbeer on a cold day, and Harry let out a breath that he seemed to have been holding for a long time. "That one had been there 9 years, Stroud said quietly. "It had grown some secondary connections. Like roots." He stared at the ceiling. 9 years. "Since you were 7. She said it without flinching, because he needed people not to flinch. "I know." He lay still for a moment. He was not going to think about being 7 years old. He was going to stay present. He was going to keep going. "Next one," he said. Fragment 6 and 7 came out cleanly. Fragment 8 produced something completely unexpected. When it separated from his core, the quality of light in the room changed visibly, a brief flare of the same deep blue-white he'd seen in the mirror expanding for a fraction of a second and then settling back. Everyone in the room saw it. Stroud and her colleagues exchanged a rapid professional look. "That was your magic responding to the increased space," Stroud said, very carefully neutral. "Completely normal." "That didn't look normal," Ron said. "It's proportional to the amount of suppression being released." She looked at the diagnostic mirror. Harry looked too. The sphere of blue-white light was unmistakably bigger. Brighter. 8 fewer fragments. 8 fewer wrong-colored stones. "Right," Healer Chen said quietly, from the monitoring station. "Right, so. That's. Yes." "What?" Harry asked. Chen and Stroud had a look between them. Stroud turned to Harry. "Your core output reading it's unusual. You'll understand when I say magical cores have a measurable output level, strength, essentially. The readings we took this morning when you came in were significant for someone your age, but interpretable. What we're seeing now," she paused. "Just tell me," Harry said. "The 8 fragments were suppressing your output by approximately 40%, she said. Each removal increases the reading. By fragment 8 we're already looking at a 43% increase in core output above your baseline this morning. By the time all 31 are out," she stopped again. "Healer Stroud," Harry said. "I honestly don't have a reference point," she said. "I'll need to consult the literature." "It's possible the literature won't have one either." "He's going to be extraordinarily powerful," Hermione said, from her corner. She was sitting forward with both elbows on her knees and the expression she wore when a calculation had resolved. "The fragments have been suppressing his core output his entire life. When they're all removed, what's released is his actual power, the full thing, unimpeded. And given that his suppressed output was already, Hermione, Harry said. She stopped. I know, he said. Don't make it weird. She sat back. A beat. I mean. It's a little weird. It's a lot weird. Keep going anyway. She almost smiled. He turned back to Stroud. 2 more today. Let's finish 10. Fragments 9 and 10 were done in the last of the afternoon light, the long October shadows crossing the floor of the room while Stroud worked and Harry breathed through it, and the mirror on the wall showed his core growing incrementally clearer, the blue-white light finding room to exist that it had never had before. When the 10th fragment settled into the collection vessel with its small clink, Stroud lowered her wand and declared the session complete. Harry sat up. He'd expected to feel tired. The sessions on either side had involved pain, sustained effort, and more emotional weight than most people dealt with in a year, and his body had been through a fall and a portkey journey and 6 hours in a hospital bed. By every reasonable measure he should have been exhausted. He was not exhausted. He was the opposite of exhausted. He was awake in a way that had edges. The room was sharper. The light was clearer. When he reached for his glasses out of habit and then stopped, realized he could read the writing on the collection vessel label clearly from 3 feet without them, he held the glasses in his hand for a moment and then put them aside. Your vision? Stroud asked. Apparently it's fine. Magical vision correction is one of the first things core expansion affects, she said. I'll add it to the notes. Don't throw the glasses away yet. It may not be permanent until all fragments are removed. She paused. Or it may be. We'll see. He's not wearing his glasses, Ron said, as if confirming something he was seeing. I can see that, Ron. You've worn glasses your whole life. I'm aware. Ron looked at him. Then at the mirror. Then back at him. Everything is very strange, he said, with the matter-of-fact tone of someone deciding to simply accept that. Yes, Harry agreed. Stroud discharged him with a list of instructions, a follow-up appointment for the following morning, and a private word at the door that she pulled Remus in for. Harry heard fragments of it, monitoring, second session, results of the signature analysis, discretion strongly advised, and he wasn't worried about Remus. Remus would not bury the information or manage it. He would be honest, and if he was going to carry guilt about not noticing sooner, which Harry could see he was going to do, he would do it quietly and channel it into being useful, which was the Lupin method and had always been. They gave Harry a room for the night. St. Mungo's had a small overnight ward for complex cases, and Hermione and Ron stayed until visiting hours ended, and in those hours Hermione did what Hermione did, which was research. She'd requested copies of the preliminary fragment signature readings from Healer Stroud, which Stroud had provided with a look that said she'd expected nothing less, and she was cross-referencing them against a stack of books that the hospital library had provided at her request along with 3 she'd apparently had in her bag already, because Hermione always had relevant books already, and she was compiling notes in her precise small handwriting with the focused velocity of someone who had been given a problem she was furious about and was channeling that fury into information. Talk to me, Harry said, from the bed. I'm not ready to report yet. I don't want a report. I want to hear you thinking. She looked up. Adjusted. All right. The signature analysis will tell us who cast each fragment, because magical signatures are unique, as distinctive as fingerprints, actually more so because they can't be masked completely. The type of magic used to create and implant a soul fragment leaves a trace. Stroud's team are analyzing all 31 fragments currently, but the analysis takes time because they have to compare the signatures against known reference samples. And for signatures they don't have references for. That's harder. They can characterize the magic, its nature, its approximate age, certain tendencies, but not necessarily attribute it to a specific person. Not immediately. She turned a page. Harry, I've been reading about fragmentary implantation in the legal literature, and the thing that's striking me is how recent the regulatory framework is. Clause 18 of the International Statute was only passed in 1942. Before that, it wasn't illegal. It wasn't codified as illegal. Dark practitioners had used it for centuries, implanting fragments of their own soul into followers to create loyalty bonds, to monitor them, to remotely influence behavior. She paused. To suppress abilities in individuals they found threatening. The word sat in the room. Suppress, Harry said. Intentional suppression via soul fragment implantation. It's documented, there are case studies going back to the 1500s. She looked at him with the particular directness she used when she was about to say something she knew he wasn't going to like. A sufficiently powerful magical being, subjected to systematic suppression via multiple implanted fragments from a young age, would develop with severely limited expression of their actual magical capacity. Not in terms of ability, the ability would still be there, but in terms of access to it. Like a dam. Like Stroud said. The red-black one. Yes. But not just that one. All of them, collectively. She breathed. Harry, whoever did this, or the majority of it, wasn't just trying to put something inside you. They were trying to put a ceiling on you. A permanent one. Ron, who had been quiet, said, so they were scared of what he'd be. Yes, Hermione said. Good, Harry said. Both of them looked at him. They should have been, he said simply, and reached for the glass of water on his bedside table, and drank it, and said nothing more about it. Ron left first, because Mrs. Weasley had sent a return owl that he described as, essentially a howler about our well-being, and he needed to write a response that would prevent her from arriving at St. Mungo's in person in the middle of the night. He hugged Harry before he left, properly, the kind Ron reserved for situations where he felt things too large for words, and then walked out with his shoulders set like someone preparing to write the most diplomatic letter of his life. Hermione stayed until 9. She sat by the window while Harry lay in the dark and they talked, not about fragments, not about signatures or legal frameworks, just talked, the way they sometimes did when neither of them was performing anything. She told him about a letter she'd received from her mother about a neighbor's cat. He told her about a dream he'd had last week that had been entirely about being very lost in a supermarket, which seemed straightforwardly symbolic in retrospect. She laughed, which was the right sound at the right time, and when visiting hours ended she squeezed his hand and said she'd be back in the morning. Hermione, he said, as she reached the door. She turned. Thank you. For this afternoon. For not, you don't need to thank me for that. For not falling apart, he said. It helped. That you didn't. She looked at him. I fell apart in the corridor while you were being assessed, she said. Very briefly. Ron held my hand. Good. We took turns. He smiled. Good. He paused. Find me names, Hermione. She held his gaze for a moment, something fierce and precise in her expression. Every single one, she said. When she was gone, Harry lay in the dark hospital room and looked at the ceiling and took stock of himself. 10 fragments removed. 21 still in place. He could feel the difference, not in some magical, transcendent way, but practically. The noise was quieter. Not gone, not even close to gone, but reduced from 31 discordant voices to 21. He could hear himself think more clearly. He could feel where his own instincts were, separate from the interference, and they were sharp in a way that felt new and ancient at the same time, like a room he had never been in but somehow remembered perfectly. He thought about the red-black fragment. Dense. Aggressive. A damn section. He thought about what Hermione had said about suppression, about ceilings, about powerful magical beings limited from their potential from infancy. He thought about who in his life might have had reason to want that ceiling to stay in place. He didn't land on conclusions. Not yet. He was going to wait for Stroud's signature analysis and he was going to be patient and he was going to make decisions based on evidence. This was, he recognized, a way of thinking he was capable of now in a way he hadn't quite been this morning. Whatever the 10 extractions had done to his mental clarity was not subtle. He fell asleep inside a minute and did not dream. He was awake at 6, which was unusual for him. He lay still for a moment assessing the quality of his wakefulness. There was none of the dragging reluctance of his normal mornings, none of the heaviness that had followed him out of sleep for as long as he could remember. He felt awake the way he felt in the sky on his broom. Present. Inhabiting himself cleanly. He dressed, found that his vision was still clear without his glasses, and walked down to the end of the ward where there was a window looking out over London in the early grey light. The city was there and vast and going about its business entirely unaware that in a hospital room 1 floor up, Harry Potter had spent the night becoming very slightly more himself. Remus found him there an hour later. He came with 2 cups of something hot from the hospital canteen and sat beside Harry on the bench below the window and handed him one without saying anything. They sat with the view and the warmth of the cups and the particular companionship of 2 people who had established, without ever formally discussing it, that they could exist in comfortable silence. "How are you feeling?" Remus asked, eventually. "Different," Harry said. "Better. Clearer." "Clearer how?" "Like the volume's been turned down on something I didn't know was loud." He wrapped both hands around the cup. "You know when you've been in a noisy room for a long time and then you go outside? And the quiet isn't just absence of sound, it's like you can actually hear your own thoughts." Remus nodded slowly. "Like that," Harry said. "Except the noisy room was my own head." Remus was quiet for a moment. "I owe you something," he said. "You don't." "I do. I should have, there were signs, Harry. Your magical development has always been erratic in ways that didn't add up. The pattern of it, looking back. I should have, Remus." Harry looked at him. "How would you have known? This is something no healer has ever seen. Stroud has been doing this for 23 years and she'd never seen one fragment without consent, let alone 31. You're not a healer. You're a person who cared about me and didn't have enough information." He paused. "That's not a crime." Remus looked out the window. The city was brightening incrementally, London doing its slow morning thing. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "All right. I received an owl last night. After visiting hours. From Dumbledore. He let that settle. He knows you're here. I don't know how, possibly Madame Pomfrey or McGonagall relayed the information, or he has other means. He wants to come." Harry felt something sharpen in his chest that was nothing to do with fragments. "What did you tell him?" "I haven't responded yet." Remus met his eyes. "I wanted to ask you first." This was, Harry thought, exactly why he'd asked for Remus and not anyone else. "You told me he knows I'm here," he said. "You didn't say you told him where I am or what's happening." "I didn't. Madame Pomfrey's information would have been limited to the emergency transfer. She wouldn't have had Stroud's findings." "Good." Harry thought for a moment. "He's going to come regardless of what we say." "Probably. Then let him come." He looked back out at the city. "But I want Stroud's analysis first. I want to know what she's found before I sit in a room with Dumbledore." Remus studied him. There it was again, that look of someone recalibrating. "When did you get like this?" he asked, and there was something almost wondering in it. "Yesterday," Harry said. And he meant it. Breakfast arrived at 7:30, and Harry ate all of it, which surprised the trainee healer who delivered it because apparently patients in the core assessment ward typically had no appetite. The second session with Stroud was scheduled for 9. Harry used the time in between to write 2 letters, one to Neville, brief and honest, telling him what had happened without the medical detail, mostly because Neville deserved to hear it from him and not through rumor, and one to Ginny, which took longer because there was more to say and he found himself writing 3 different versions before settling on one that was honest without being overwhelming. He was sealing the second letter when Stroud came in 20 minutes before the session, which was unusual enough that he put the letter down and waited. She had the signature analysis parchment with her. Not the complete one. She told him immediately that the complete analysis would take 2 more days, but the preliminary results, covering the 14 most recently implanted fragments, the ones with the clearest and least calcified signatures. She put it on the table between them and let him read it. He read it twice. Of the 14 most recent fragments, 9 carried a magical signature that matched a known reference. The reference was Lord Voldemort. 3 carried signatures that were designated unknown, consistent with each other, suggesting one caster, but not matching any reference in St. Mungo's registry. 1 carried a signature designated unknown B. And 1, fragment 6, the one that had released warmth like butterbeer when it left him, carried a signature that had been matched immediately because its reference was one of the most documented in the wizarding world. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. Harry read the name a second time. The parchment was steady in his hands. I want to be clear, Stroud said, that preliminary analysis carries a margin of error. What's the margin of error on a magical signature match? She paused. 0.3%. So for all practical purposes, that's definitive. Another pause. For all practical purposes, yes. He folded the parchment. He held it between his hands. He was aware of Remus, who had been in the room, having gone completely still. Is there a second Dumbledore fragment in the older group? He asked. You said there were 2. In the outline. Stroud's expression shifted slightly. There are 2 signatures in the older group that are consistent with unknown A. The Dumbledore signature in the preliminary analysis is one clear match. Whether the second, the one from the older group, is also his requires the full analysis. When? 2 days, she said. Possibly less. He nodded. He put the folded parchment in his pocket. He looked up at Stroud. Are we starting the session? She looked at him with the expression she'd been looking at him with since yesterday, that professional evaluation overlaid with something that was not quite personal but was close to it, the look of someone encountering something they hadn't expected and were taking seriously. You don't need a moment, she asked. I've had moments, he said. What I need is for more of these things to be out of me. Let's go. The second session pushed from 10 fragments to 13, because Harry's core was responding well and Stroud agreed under mild pressure and because fragment 11 through 13 were clustered together and separating them out as a trio rather than stopping mid-cluster was medically preferable. When the 13th clink echoed in the collection vessel and Harry felt a release so significant his vision went white at the edges for 3 seconds, he lay back and breathed through the integration and listened to Heelerchen call out readings in a voice that had lost its professional neutrality and gone slightly awestruck. What? Harry asked. Your output level, Chen said. I need to recalibrate the instrument. Is that bad? No, Chen said. It's just that the scale only goes up to certain levels, and, it's fine, Stroud said, firmly, to Chen. She looked at Harry. It's fine. Your core is healthy, it's integrating correctly, everything is exactly what it should be. Except the scale, Harry said mildly. We'll get a bigger scale, she said, with exactly enough wryness that he almost laughed. 17 fragments remaining. 13 out. He lay still after the session while his magic settled into its new space, and he felt it like a tide finding its level, not violent or explosive, just there, present in his and considerably larger than it had been 48 hours ago. He flexed the fingers of his left hand. A small spark jumped between his fingertips without his wand. He looked at it. He'd done wandless magic before, small things, accidental things, the moments of accidental magic that had followed him since childhood. This was not accidental. He had thought it and it had happened, immediately and cleanly, with no intermediary of effort or focus. Just intention and result, as simple as moving his hand. He closed his fingers over the spark. Ron and Hermione arrived at 11, and with them came Fred and George, which was not what Harry had expected but was, he found, exactly right. Fred and George came through the door with the particular quality of entry that suggested they had been told to be calm and were exercising enormous self-control and being only moderately extremely themselves. Fred was carrying an enormous paper bag that clearly contained food contraband from somewhere not the hospital canteen. George was carrying what appeared to be a stuffed owl, which he presented to Harry with complete seriousness. "For comfort," George said. "It's hideous," Harry said. "All the best comfort items are." Fred set the paper bag down and pulled out 2 pieces of what turned out to be treacle tart wrapped in paper from a bakery, which was Harry's favorite thing and which Fred handed over with none of the fanfare that usually accompanied the Weasley twins' gestures, just a directness that said something about how seriously they were taking this. Harry took the tart and ate it and let them sit around the bed and be present without making it into a scene. "Mum knows," Fred said. "I figured." "She cried," George said. "Briefly. Then she started cleaning things, which means she's angry." "She's not angry at you," Fred added quickly. "She's angry at whoever did it," Harry said. "Right. Good." He looked at them. "Are you going to say something about the fragments, or are you going to avoid it?" Fred and George exchanged a look. "We were going to avoid it," Fred admitted. "We had a whole plan. It involved approximately 4 more jokes about the stuffed owl." "But?" Harry prompted. "But you look like someone who doesn't need jokes about stuffed owls right now," George said. "No, the jokes were good. I mean, tell me what you want to say." Another exchange of looks. Fred leaned forward, elbows on knees, all the performance stripped away. "We're angry," he said simply. "Really angry. At whoever thought they had the right to," he stopped. "You've been our friend for 6 years. And the whole time something was being done to you. Something that, we didn't know. We couldn't see it. And we're angry we didn't see it." "You couldn't have seen it," Harry said. "I didn't see it." "Still," George said. "Still," Harry agreed. "I know." He looked at both of them. "I'm angry too. I'm going to do something about it. You can help with that, if you want, when the time comes." "Obviously," they said, simultaneously, with identical expressions that said the question had been unnecessary. Hermione settled in her corner with her research. Ron settled beside the bed. Fred and George held a whispered conversation about something that had them both almost smiling, which was entirely their way of processing emotion, and Harry found it deeply comforting. The afternoon moved. People came and went. Remus stayed. At 3, the owl that Harry had been expecting arrived, not Dumbledore himself, not yet, but a formal note on cream parchment with the Hogwarts seal. Measured language. Expressed concern. Asked to visit at Harry's convenience. Requested that he reach out before speaking to anyone in an official capacity. Signed with the full name and the line of honorifics. Harry read it again, handed it to Remus without comment, and went back to the piece of treacle tart he hadn't finished. "Well?" Remus asked, having read it. "Tell him Thursday," Harry said. "I want the full analysis in hand first." Remus wrote the response. "Thursday. 2 days away." Hermione looked up from her research. "Harry." Something in her voice. He looked at her. "Unknown," she said. "The 3 fragments with the matching unknown signature. I've been trying to cross-reference the characterization notes from Stroud's analysis, the things they can tell about magic without a name to attach it to. Age ranges, magical tradition, type of dark magic practice." She paused. "The characterization is consistent with someone trained in continental dark arts traditions, pre-1960, with a particular focus on," she glanced at the parchment, "what the analysis calls, binding and containment magic. Specifically the variety used for, Hermione," he said. "Just say it." She looked at him steadily. "I think Unknown might be someone within the ministry," she said. Possibly someone from the Department of Mysteries. The magical tradition described in the characterization is one I've read about in historical accounts of the unspeakables. She paused. The fragments they implanted were clustered differently from Voldemort's. Less aggressive in their suppression, more architectural. More like they were building something. Building what? I don't know yet. She held his gaze. But it's not the same goal as Voldemort's. Someone within the Ministry had a completely separate reason for doing this, completely separate from whatever Voldemort wanted. She let that land. Which means the people who violated you weren't working together. They all had different reasons. And none of them told each other. Harry sat with that for a moment. 3 separate parties. 3 separate agendas. All meeting inside one 16-year-old boy's magical core without any of them knowing about the others. It would have been almost darkly funny if it hadn't been his life. How very popular I am, he said. Ron made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something that wasn't. There may be more parties in the older fragments, Hermione said. We won't know until the full analysis. Thursday, Harry said. Dumbledore on Thursday. By then we'll have the full analysis. I want every name, every signature, every piece of evidence Stroud's team has found. All of it. He looked at Hermione. Can you organize that? Yes. And I want your thoughts on what it means legally. Not just medically. What it means for each party under Clause 18. Hermione's eyes went very bright. Life imprisonment per fragment, she said. Per fragment, Harry. 9 fragments with Voldemort's signature, minimum 9 life sentences if we ever get to that point. The Ministry fragments, she pulled up her parchment, 3 fragments, 3 life sentences. Dumbledore, 1 confirmed so far, he said. Possibly 2. She was very quiet for a moment. Then, 1 to 2 life sentences. The room was quiet around that. I'm not, Harry started, and then stopped, and thought about what he actually wanted to say. I'm not doing this for revenge. That's not what this is. I know, Hermione said. I'm doing it because it was done. Because it was wrong and it was illegal and the people who did it made choices that had consequences, and consequences don't stop existing because the person who suffered them decides to be forgiving. He looked at his hands. I'll decide later what I want to do with each name. When I have all of them. When I understand why. Okay, she said. Simply. Without argument or editorializing, which was the right call and not the easiest one for Hermione, and he appreciated it. Can I ask something? Fred said, from the chair he'd pulled up near the window. Entirely unrelated to the legal framework. Go on, Harry said. When all 31 are out. Fred gestured vaguely at the mirror, still showing the fracture compass mapping, still showing the blue-white sphere with its diminishing population of wrong-colored stones. What does it feel like? Harry thought about it. About the 10 cleared spaces that were already his, already integrated, already filling with something that was purely and only him. About the 10 additional from this morning, the 17 still remaining, the promise of a future session and another after that until the last one, the oldest one, the gray-green ancient one near the center, came out and it was finished. Like waking up, he said. That's what it feels like. Like every extraction is, like waking up a little more. Fred nodded. He was quiet for a moment. Then let's get you the rest of the way awake, he said. The second day ended with 17 remaining. The city outside went dark. Remus sat with Harry while the lights in the ward dimmed and the sounds of the hospital quieted. Harry wasn't tired, he was again, despite everything, comprehensively awake, but he lay still anyway because his body deserved rest even if his mind had other ideas. At some point between 1 and 2 in the morning, without a wand, without effort, without intending to, Harry reached for the lamp on the bedside table to check the time and the lamp turned on before his hand touched it. He looked at it for a moment. He looked at his hand. 21 fragments still in place, still pressing, still suppressing. And still this. Still capable of this, still growing into this, even now, even incomplete. He thought about Dumbledore arriving on Thursday. He thought about what he was going to say. He reached out again and turned the lamp back off. In the dark, he smiled. Chapter 3, The shape of a cage. Wednesday morning came in grey and quiet, and Harry was already dressed and sitting in the chair by the window when Stroud arrived for rounds at 7:15. She stopped when she saw him, took in the fact that he'd moved the visitors' chairs into a rough semicircle, as if he'd been expecting people, and was sitting at the center of it with a cup of tea and the collected signature analysis notes spread across the windowsill, organized in a way that made immediate and obvious sense. "You've been up a while," she said. "Couple of hours." She pulled her wand and ran the morning diagnostic. The readings made Healer Chen, who was 2 steps behind her, stop walking. "Your integration rate overnight," Stroud said, studying the parchment with the focused expression of someone receiving news faster than they'd expected it. "It's accelerated." "Is that a problem?" "No. It's your core claiming its space. It's doing it faster than most because," she paused, chose a different word, "because of what it is." She lowered her wand. "How do you feel?" "Like I said yesterday." "Clearer?" "More than yesterday?" He considered. "Yes." She nodded, made a note, sat down in one of the semicircle chairs. "I want to do 15 today if you'll let me. There's a natural cluster in the remaining 17, a group of 8 that were implanted in the same period and have developed some interconnection. Separating the cluster is going to be more complex than individual extractions, and I want to get through it in one session." "Will it be like Fragment 5? "Worse than 5, she said honestly. "But better than leaving them half done. I want Chen and Okafor both in the room, and I want Healer Reyes as well. She specializes in clustered implantations, and she's the best I know. This is going to be my hardest session and your hardest session. But 15 out means only 2 remaining after." "Yes. The cluster of 8 plus 7 individual ones gets you to 15. 2 left after that, the red-black one and the oldest one." "Then we do 15 today," he said. "The cluster, the 7, and we finish tomorrow." She looked at him for a long moment. "You know, most patients, I'm not most patients." "No," she agreed. "You're really not." She stood. "Session starts at 9. Eat breakfast first." "All of it." He ate all of it. Remus arrived at 8 with Hermione, who was carrying more books than seemed physically reasonable and had the look of someone who had also been up for hours and found this entirely acceptable. She set the books down, looked at the organized notes on the windowsill, and immediately began rearranging them in a way that Harry supposed made more sense to her system, which was fine because she was going to be the one working with them and his organization was more intuitive than rigorous. "Full analysis comes today," she said, without preamble. Stroud mentioned. "I've been in correspondence with her since 6 this morning. She's expedited it." Hermione sat down and looked at him with the expression that meant she had things to say and was calibrating how to say them. "Are you ready for what it might contain?" "I was ready yesterday." "The older fragments, Harry. The ones that have been there since you were an infant. The signatures on those, Hermione." "I'm just saying it might be, I know what it might be." He met her eyes. "I know who it might be. I've known since yesterday morning when I read the preliminary report." He paused. "Have you slept?" She blinked. "Some." "How much?" "A reasonable amount." Hermione. 4 hours, she said. "I was reading." "I know." "Thank you." He said it directly, because she deserved directness. "For reading instead of sleeping. For being furious on my behalf and putting that fury into something useful. I know that's how you work and I want you to know I see it." She looked at him. Something crossed her face, not quite surprise, but close to it, like she'd been braced for him to tell her to rest instead of working. "I'm going to have the complete framework ready before Dumbledore arrives tomorrow," she said. "Every fragment, every signature, every legal implication under Clause 18. Organized and referenced. I know you will. And I want to be in the room when he comes." "You will be." She sat back, apparently satisfied, and opened her first book. The morning session started at 9 and ran until 12:30. It was the hardest 3.5 hours of Harry's life, and this was a life that had included fighting a basilisk, a graveyard resurrection, and a year under Umbridge's oversight. The cluster extraction, 8 interconnected fragments that had grown filamental ties between them over 9 years of cohabitation in his core, required all 4 healers working in a precisely coordinated sequence, and what it produced was not the clean succession of individual releases Harry had become accustomed to, but a sustained, rolling pressure that built and periodically spiked with a precision that was almost insulting. He did not make a sound through any of it. He breathed. He gripped the bed rail when the spikes hit. Remus sat at his right, and at one point Harry took his wrist without thinking, not holding on in distress but in the same way you might grip something to anchor yourself during turbulence, and Remus went completely still and let him and didn't make anything of it. When the 8th fragment of the cluster released, the diagnostic mirror blew out. Not broke, blew out, a concussive expansion of the imaging spell that sent the glass rippling outward and the room filling briefly with the deep blue-white light of Harry's unencumbered core, brighter and larger and more present than it had any right to be in the middle of a hospital room. Stroud caught the instrument. Chen's parchment went flying. Healer Reyes swore in Portuguese. Harry lay on his back and looked at the ceiling and breathed and felt something he had no adequate word for, not power, not peace, more like the feeling of standing in a field after a storm when the air is cleaned and the pressure is gone and everything is still and the space is all yours. He lay in it for a full minute before anyone spoke. "Merlin," Healer Chen said, from the floor where he'd grabbed the parchment. "Are you all right?" Remus asked. Harry realized he was still holding his wrist. "Yes." He let go. "Sorry." "Don't be." Stroud was already running the reassessment diagnostic. She read the results and said nothing for a moment. Then she turned to Chen with a very deliberate calmness and said, "We need a different instrument for the output readings." "I recalibrated yesterday, a different instrument entirely," she said. "This one won't," she paused, "it won't register accurately anymore." She looked at Harry. 7 more today. Can you do 7 more? He pushed himself to sitting. The world steadied. "Yes," he said. The 7 individual extractions were comparatively straightforward, simpler spell work, cleaner releases, and they went through them over the next hour at a pace that felt almost leisurely after the cluster work. With each one, the quality of the room shifted slightly. Not visibly, not in any way Stroud's instruments could measure once the first one had given up pretending, just a quality of presence that hadn't been there before, a weight and clarity in the air around Harry that was not threatening or dramatic but was absolutely real. The 14th individual fragment came out and Healer Reyes, who had said very little since her Portuguese profanity, looked at Harry with large dark eyes and said, "I have worked in magical core assessment for 17 years. "Yes," Harry said. She looked at Stroud. Stroud gave a small nod. Reyes looked back at Harry. "In 17 years I have never seen a core signature that qualifies as Class Omega." Harry looked at her. "What's Class Omega?" "It's not a diagnostic category we use in common practice," Stroud said carefully. "Because it effectively has no ceiling. It was removed from the standard assessment framework in 1953 because it was considered a theoretical rather than a practical designation." "What does it mean practically?" Stroud held his gaze. "It means that your magical capacity, once fully unencumbered, exceeds any standard measurement framework we currently have." The room was quiet. "So it means I'm powerful," Harry said. "It means you are to power what the sky is to height," Reyes said, apparently having moved past calibrated language. Harry thought about this for a moment. Then he said, "Good. Let's get the last 2 out tomorrow." He was discharged to the overnight room again by mid-afternoon, and his body, having been considerably more put through it today than yesterday, was making its first serious argument for rest. He compromised, an hour lying down while Hermione worked in the chair beside him, her pen moving quickly, her occasional quietly outraged intake of breath marking each new discovery in the full analysis that Stroud's team had delivered at noon. He was aware of each breath she took. He was more aware of things in general now. He was finding sounds sharper, peripheral vision wider, the quality of attention he could give to multiple things at once increased in a way that was not overwhelming but was noticeable. He filed it away. Relevant later. "Tell me," he said, after the fourth intake of breath. Hermione set down her pen. She picked up the full analysis parchment and looked at it the way she looked at things she needed to present carefully. 31 fragments, she said. Complete signature attribution. She took a breath. 14 fragments carry Voldemort's signature. He'd thought it was 9. It was 9 in the preliminary. The full analysis corrected the preliminary on 5 of the older ones. They were more calcified, harder to read initially. She paused. 14. All right, he said. Who else? Unknown, the ministry signature I mentioned. 5 fragments. She looked at him. Stroud's team worked on the characterization overnight. Unknown is almost certainly Algernon Croaker. Croaker. Harry searched his memory. Department of Mysteries. Head of the Unspeakables. Former head. Retired in 1993. Her voice was precise and flat, the tone she used when the precision was doing work that emotion would impede. The magical tradition analysis, the implantation methodology, the specific binding and containment architecture of the 5 fragments attributed to him, Stroud is prepared to state in an official report that the match is compelling enough to warrant investigation. 5 fragments, Harry said. 5 life sentences. Yes. And? She turned the page. Unknown B is a single fragment. The characterization suggests it was implanted by someone with a non-British magical education, likely Eastern European, traditional folk magic tradition rather than dark arts training. The fragment itself is unusual in that it appears to have been designed not to suppress but to, she frowned at the text, to record. Like a passive observer. It's been watching, essentially. Collecting impressions of your magical core's development. Something cold moved through Harry's chest. Someone's been watching me. Through a fragment. For approximately 11 years. That's a different kind of violation, he said, quietly. Yes. She didn't dress it up. We don't have a name for Unknown B yet. Stroud is consulting with international registries. And Dumbledore's fragments, Harry said. Hermione set the parchment down on her knee. She looked at him very directly. 2, she said. The preliminary was correct about 1, and the full analysis confirms the second in the older group. 2 fragments attributed with a 99.7% certainty to Albus Dumbledore. 2 life sentences, technically, under the law as written. Harry let the number exist without reacting to it. What do they do? He asked. Characterization. The first, fragment 6, the one you said felt warm when it left, she looked at her notes, Stroud characterizes it as a monitoring and guidance fragment. Not suppression. Not observation for external purposes. It was oriented toward you. Toward influencing your decision-making in subtle ways. Nudging intuition. Reinforcing certain emotional responses over others. Harry thought about 6 years of trusting Dumbledore. Of following his guidance without question. Of how right it had always seemed and how complete that rightness had felt. He thought about whether any of those feelings had been his. He was not going to spiral about that. Not now. Later, maybe, but not now. The second, he said. Hermione's jaw tightened slightly. The second is the one near the center. The oldest one. Gray-green. Stroud says it's the most integrated. She paused. The characterization of the second one is, it's a tether, Harry. That's the best word for it. It was implanted to connect your core to a specific magical outcome. To ensure that at a critical moment your magic would behave in a specific, predetermined way. Silence. Predetermined how? Stroud can't say from the fragment alone. She says the tether was designed to activate under specific conditions that she can infer from its architecture but not state definitively. The conditions appear to involve, she stopped. Breathed. Proximity to Voldemort and mortal harm. Harry was very still. She thinks it's a death tether, Hermione said, and her voice cracked slightly on the last word, just slightly, and then held. Something that would cause your magic to behave in a specific way at the moment of your death. Or that would draw you toward that death. She's not certain which. For a long moment the room was nothing but the sound of London outside the window and the faint noises of the hospital ward beyond the door. He was always going to let me die, Harry said. Not a question. We don't know his intention, Hermione. She was quiet. He was always going to let me die, Harry said again. And this time it wasn't anger in his voice. It wasn't even bitterness. It was something more final than either of those things, the sound of a last illusion stepping aside. Hermione got up from her chair and sat on the edge of his bed and put her arms around him, and Harry let her, and they stayed like that for a while in the room's quiet light with all 31 violations mapped and named and laid out on the parchment on the floor. He didn't cry. She didn't cry. They just stayed there, and that was enough. He comes tomorrow, Harry said, eventually. Yes. Good. He straightened. Let her go. I want to be looking at him when he reads what's on that parchment. She pulled back and looked at his face. You're not afraid of him. No. You've always been, I know what I've always been. He met her eyes. I'm not that anymore. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded, picked up the parchment from the floor, and went back to her chair. Neville came at 4. He came alone, which Harry appreciated, no group, no orchestrated visit, just Neville walking in with his round face and his solid, genuine presence and a paper bag that turned out to contain treacle tart, independently and without coordination with Fred, which made Harry laugh properly for the first time in 2 days. I got your letter, Neville said, settling into the chair Ron usually occupied. How are things at school? Weird. Everyone knows you're here, obviously. McGonagall made an announcement. She said, Neville paused, apparently deciding whether to be diplomatic. She said there had been a medical development and that you were receiving appropriate care and that speculation was unhelpful, which of course meant everyone speculated constantly for the entire rest of the day. What are they saying? The more dramatic theories involve you-know-who and possession. Lavender thinks you've been cursed. Seamus thinks it's a Quidditch injury that's more serious than they're saying. He paused. Malfoy is very smug, which means he probably knows something's wrong and is enjoying it. Or it means Malfoy is always smug and we're pattern matching, Harry said. Also possible. Neville looked at him. Really looked, the way he'd been doing since he sat down but had been letting himself do more openly now that they'd done the preliminary conversation. You look different. So everyone keeps telling me. Not bad different. Just, more like yourself. Like someone turned the lights on properly. He paused. If that makes sense. It makes perfect sense. Harry looked at him. Neville, can I ask you something? Obviously. Your magic. Have you always felt, do you feel like it comes easily to you? Like it's right there when you reach for it, or more like you're always reaching a bit further than you expect to need to? Neville thought about it with the honest consideration he brought to serious questions. Further than I expect, he said. Always. Like I know what I want to do and I can see how to do it, but there's always a bit of, he gestured vaguely, distance between me and it. Harry nodded. I want you to talk to Stroud before you go. Healer Stroud, she's the one running my treatment. I want you to let her do a preliminary diagnostic. Neville stared at him. You think I might have, I don't know. Probably not. The kind of targeting that was done to me is specifically about me, my history, my connection to Voldemort. You probably don't have fragments. Harry held his gaze. But your magic has always been erratic in ways that don't match your actual understanding and ability. You're one of the best in our year when you're comfortable. And you're almost never quite comfortable. I just think, he paused, I think you should know either way. Neville was quiet for a long moment. Okay, he said. Good. Are you, Neville started, and then took a different approach. The people who did this to you. Are you going to do something about them? Yes. Is there anything I can, when the time comes, Harry said, I'll let you know. Neville looked at him, at the particular quality of settled, forward-facing certainty in Harry's expression, and nodded. Okay, he said again, and reached for the treacle tart. This is from the bakery near the Leaky Cauldron, by the way. I made a detour. You're a good person, Neville. I know, Neville said, without any self-deprecation, which was new and very good. They sat in the easy quiet of a friendship that had found its footing, eating treacle tart while London did its afternoon things outside the window. Harry told Neville about some of what had happened, not all of it, not the Dumbledore pieces yet, but the scale of it, the reality of 31 fragments and what they'd been doing. Neville listened the way people listened when they were putting a new piece into an existing picture and watching how it changed the whole. He didn't try to fix it or minimize it. He just listened. 31 people who thought they had a right to be inside you without asking, Neville said finally. Some of them thought they were protecting me, Harry said. Some of them thought they were using me. Some of them had completely separate agendas. He paused. None of them asked. None of them asked, Neville repeated quietly. That's the part one keep coming back to, Harry said. Not the violation, specifically, though that's there. It's the assumption. That I was available. That my body, my core, myself was just, available to them. Something they could access. He looked at his hands. Like I was a resource with legs. Neville was quiet for a moment. You're not, he said. I know that now. Harry looked at the window. I've known it for a while, honestly. I just didn't have the evidence. He sent Neville to Stroud on his way out, who agreed to run a preliminary diagnostic that evening. Harry didn't ask about the results, they were Neville's results, Neville's information, Neville's to share or not. He'd done what he could do, which was notice and suggest. The rest was Neville's. Remus came back after dinner. He had that look again, the one Harry had started to recognize as Remus having spent time sitting with something difficult. He came in, accepted the tea that had been left by a trainee healer on the bedside table, sat down, and was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about what you said this morning, Remus said. About being past being confronted by anything. And I think that's partly true and partly, he chose the word carefully, armor. Harry looked at him. He could have denied it. He chose not to. Maybe, he said. The Dumbledore fragments, Remus said. You read the analysis. Hermione showed me. He wrapped both hands around his tea. Harry, I've known Albus Dumbledore for 30 years. He supervised the order, he protected your parents as best he could, he's fought Voldemort for longer than you've been alive. He is not a simple man and he is not a simple case. He paused. And none of that makes what he did acceptable. No, Harry agreed. I want to be clear about that. About where I stand. Remus looked at him directly. I'm not going to make a case for him. Not to you. Not after this. I'm not asking you to. I know. I'm telling you because tomorrow when he comes, when you're in the room with him, I don't want you to look at me and wonder whose side I'm on. His voice was steady and unambiguous. I'm on your side. Completely. Whatever you decide to do, whatever you want from that conversation, I'll support it. Harry looked at him. At the honest directness of someone who had made a decision that probably cost him something and was making peace with that cost. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me for a minimum standard. I'm thanking you for meaning it. Remus held his gaze and then nodded once, quietly, and they went back to their tea. What are you going to say to him? Remus asked. I'm going to ask him why, Harry said. And I'm going to watch his face while he decides whether to tell me the truth. And if he lies? Then I'll know more than I did before. And if he tells the truth? Harry was quiet for a moment. Outside, London had gone dark and wet, rain beginning against the window in the slow building way it had this time of year. Then I'll know exactly what I'm dealing with, he said. And I'll decide from there. Remus looked at him in the lamplight, and whatever he saw in Harry's face made his expression settle into something that was neither worry nor relief but a kind of careful, attentive respect. You know, he said, you remind me of your father in some ways. I know. But not in this way. He paused. James would have been furious. Burning the whole room down furious. He wouldn't have been able to be still about it. And my mother? Harry asked. Remus considered. Lily would have been where you are now, he said. Clear. Planning. Already 3 steps ahead. He almost smiled. She would have been terrifying in that meeting tomorrow. Good, Harry said. Then I'm in good company. The rain came down against the window, and they sat with it, and Harry let himself feel the weight of the next morning, not with dread, but with the particular concentration of someone approaching something significant and wanting to be completely awake when it arrived. He was already mostly sure what Dumbledore would say. Not the exact words, Dumbledore's words were never exact, always wrapped in the particular warm ambiguity of a man who had been answering hard questions with redirection for so long it had become a primary instinct. But the shape of it. The greater good. The plan. The necessity. The immense and genuine regret that would be entirely real and entirely insufficient. He was prepared for all of it. He was prepared because Hermione had spent 2 days researching and Remus had spent 30 years knowing the man and Stroud had spent 2 days extracting and analyzing and naming. He was prepared because 15 fragments had come out today and 22 in total, and the clarity that lived in the space they'd left behind was not soft or vague, it was precise and permanent and entirely his. He was prepared because he was, for the first time in his life, not walking into something carrying 31 extra things that weren't his. Tomorrow, he thought. Just himself, in a room, with Albus Dumbledore. He was looking forward to it. Morning arrived clear and cold, the rain having cleaned the city overnight, and Harry was up before 6 and dressed and had finished the tea and the analysis notes and the legal framework summary Hermione had left for him and had read everything twice by the time Stroud arrived. She took one look at him and said, "He comes today." At 11, Harry said. "We have time for the session first." "Harry, we have time," he said. Not insistently. Just as a fact. 2 fragments left. I want them out. I want to be complete before that conversation. She read his face. Then, the red-black one is today's work. The oldest, the tether, I'd normally say leave it for tomorrow, 1 session, give your core time to, Stroud. She stopped. Please, he said. Both. Today. She looked at him for a long moment. The professional assessment in her expression gave way to something quieter, the look of a person who understood what he was asking for and why, and who felt the weight of it the same way he did. All right, she said. Both today. We start at 7 and we take as long as it takes. Chen and Okafor and Reyes were assembled by 7:15. Remus was at Harry's right. Hermione was in the corner. Ron had arrived at 6:50 with more treacle tart that no one would eat during the session but that sat on the windowsill as a kind of ambient comfort, which was exactly the right thing to bring. The red-black fragment, fragment 30, dense and aggressive and dam-like, took 40 minutes to extract. Stroud worked at it with the focused precision of someone disabling a mechanism designed to be permanent, her wand movement smaller and slower than anything she'd done before, and all four healers monitored simultaneously. Harry breathed and gripped the rail, and when it came free, when the last of the thing that had been building a ceiling inside him since he was 4 years old pulled clear of his core, the release was so complete and so enormous that Harry felt it from the base of his spine to the top of his skull, a wave of pure magical expansion that lasted 3 full seconds and left every person in the room with the distinct physical sensation of pressure change, like being too close to a very large, very quiet explosion. The diagnostic mirror that had been replaced yesterday blew out again. Different wall, same result. Right, Ron said, from the corner. Harry was shaking. Not from pain, from magnitude. From the feeling of 40% of his own power returning to him all at once after 17 years of being held back by something someone else had put there. His hands were glowing faintly at the knuckles. Just slightly. Just enough. Breathe, Stroud said. He breathed. You with me? Yes, he said. Last one. Harry, last one, he said again, and this time there was something in it that was very gentle and very final, like a door about to close on everything that had been done to him. Please. I want it out. Stroud looked at him. At his glowing hands and his steady breathing and his completely calm, completely clear face. She looked at Remus, who gave the smallest nod. She looked back at Harry. Okay, she said. The last one. The oldest fragment, 16 years old, gray-green, calcified to the innermost architecture of his core, the death tether that someone had placed in a 1-year-old infant, was the hardest thing Stroud had ever attempted. She said so afterward, quietly and without drama. It took an hour and 7 minutes. It required all 4 healers working in a sequence so precise it was closer to music than medicine. It required Harry to remain still through sensations that moved past pain into a territory that had no word, a deep and ancient pulling at the very roots of him, and he remained still because he was not going to give this last thing the satisfaction of moving him. It came free at 9:23 in the morning. The collection vessel shattered. Every piece of glass in the room that was capable of shattering shattered. The lights blew out and came back on. The door swung open by itself. 3 healers in the corridor outside stopped and looked in and could not later adequately describe what they had seen. The diagnostic equipment that Stroud had brought in and the replacement diagnostic equipment she had sourced and the new larger instrument from the research wing all went silent simultaneously and then, slowly, began producing readings that none of the healers in the room verbalized. And Harry sat up, in a room full of shattered glass and blown-out instruments and 4 very quiet healers and 2 speechless friends and Remus Lupin who had put his face in his hands for a moment before straightening. Harry sat up and looked at his hands. No glow. No sparks. Just his hands, steady and quiet. And within him, silence. Clean, complete, unburdened silence. No noise. No foreign presences. No 31 voices in 31 languages pressing against his thoughts and feelings and magic. Just him. Just Harry Potter, without a single thing in him that wasn't his. He let out a slow breath. Done? He asked. Stroud was looking at the largest instrument, which had produced a single reading before giving up. She turned to face him. Her professional composure was completely intact and her eyes were bright. Done, she said. He nodded. He got up from the bed. He stood. Hermione made a sound that she immediately suppressed. Ron's knuckles had gone white around the arm of his chair. Remus had lowered his hands and was watching Harry with the expression of someone witnessing something they would be telling people about for the rest of their life. Harry felt the floor under his feet, solid and real. He felt the air moving through the room where the window was open. He felt the cold morning light on his face. He felt himself, all of himself, nothing missing, nothing foreign, the entire undiluted reality of being Harry James Potter at 16 years old with everything that had ever been taken from him returned. He looked at the window. At the clear October sky beyond it. "What time is Dumbledore coming?" he asked. 11, Hermione said. He turned to look at her. At Ron. At Remus. At Stroud and her team. At the shattered glass and the silent instruments and the still open door. "Then we have time for breakfast," he said. Chapter 4, named and counted. Breakfast was eggs and toast and strong tea, and Harry ate at the small table by the window while London moved through its Thursday morning outside and Hermione sat across from him with her organized parchments and Ron ate his way through a second plate and tried not to watch Harry too obviously, which he was doing about every 45 seconds. "You can just look at me," Harry said. "I'm not, Ron." Ron put his fork down and looked at him properly. Whatever he saw made him press his lips together for a moment. "You're different," he said. "I know I keep saying it. But you're different, Harry. I know. Like when you were on the broom yesterday morning, before the match, I mean. But more." Ron gestured vaguely at all of him. "You always had this thing where you seemed like you were about to brace for something. Even when things were fine. Like you were always waiting for the next hit." He paused. "That's gone." Harry thought about it. About the quality of the morning, the clean, uncluttered clarity of simply existing in a room and having that room contain nothing except the things that were actually in it. No noise. No pressure. No subterranean interference with the process of being himself. "Yes," he said. "That's a good way to put it." "Is it weird?" Ron asked. "That it's gone. It would be weirder if I missed it. Do you?" Harry considered honestly. "No," he said. "Not even slightly." Ron picked his fork back up. "Good," he said, with the same quiet viciousness as before, and went back to his eggs. At 10:30 Healer Stroud came by with post-extraction documentation for Harry to review, a formal record of all 31 extractions, their signatures, their characterizations, the dates of their approximate implantation, and a clinical summary of their collective effects on his magical development. Reading it was an experience Harry suspected he would need to process properly at some later point when there was time and privacy, but for now he read it with the same focused attachment he'd been applying to everything since yesterday's session. He signed the copy Stroud needed for the hospital record and kept his own. "I'll be filing the official St. Mungo's report with the ministry today," Stroud told him. "The soul fragment violation report is mandatory. I'm legally required to file it once the extraction is complete." "I know," Harry said. "File it. It will reach the Department of Magical Law Enforcement within 24 hours. After that it becomes a legal matter." "I know." He met her eyes. "Good." She studied him. "Harry. The report names Voldemort as a primary violator, which they'll dismiss. It names Unknown A, which I've characterized with sufficient specificity to point directly at Croaker. It names Unknown B, still unidentified. And it names," she paused. "Dumbledore," he said. "It names Dumbledore," she confirmed. "File it," he said again. She nodded. She started to turn away, then stopped. "I want you to know something," she said. "Off the clinical record. Just, person to person." She looked at him with the directness she'd been giving him since the beginning, the refusal to cushion things beyond what was necessary. "What you've come through in 3 days, the extractions, the integration, what it's cost your body and your mind, most adults would not have managed it as cleanly as you have. Not half as cleanly." She paused. "I know that might be cold comfort given the broader circumstances." "It's not cold," he said. "Thank you." She gave a single nod and left. At 5 to 11, Ron left. Harry asked him to, and Ron didn't argue. He understood the geometry of it, that the room needed to be specific, that having Ron in it would make it about comfort when it needed to be about clarity. Ron gripped his shoulder on the way out, said nothing, and went. His absence was itself a kind of support. At 11 exactly, there was a knock at the door. Harry was sitting in the chair he'd moved to face the door, not at the bed, not in a patient's position. The chair was upright and the room was orderly and the analysis parchment was on the table beside him, organized and visible. Hermione was to his left, one chair back, with her own copy of the analysis open on her knee. Remus was standing by the window, facing inward. "Come in," Harry said. Albus Dumbledore walked through the door. He was exactly as Harry had always known him, the height, the silver beard, the half-moon spectacles, the robes that managed to be both eccentric and authoritative, the eyes that were normally full of that particular blue brightness. Normally. Today the brightness was there but it was doing something different, it was careful, Harry noticed. It was a brightness that had done some preparation. Dumbledore came in and took in the room in one comprehensive look and the look lingered on Harry for a moment longer than it moved over anything else. "Harry," he said. "Professor Dumbledore," Harry said. "Sit down." A brief pause. Dumbledore sat, in the chair across from Harry's, because that was the only chair positioned for it, because Harry had put it there. He folded his hands on his knee and looked at Harry with the expression that Harry had always taken for warmth and had now reclassified as something more complicated. "I'm glad you agreed to see me," he said. "Were you worried I wouldn't? I thought you might need more time." "I've had enough time," Harry said. 16 years of it, actually. He kept his voice even. Factual. He watched Dumbledore absorb the tone, the steadiness of it, the absence of deference that had always been there before. He watched the older man recalibrate, very slightly, very quickly, with the practiced subtlety of someone who was excellent at recalibrating. "How are you feeling?" Dumbledore asked. "Completely well," Harry said. "Better than I've felt in my life, in fact." He paused. "You know what they found?" It wasn't a question. Dumbledore had had time to receive information from multiple directions, Madame Pomfrey, McGonagall, potentially sources Harry hadn't identified, and the particular quality of his preparedness this morning confirmed it. "I know some of what they found," Dumbledore said. Madame Pomfrey was able to convey the initial findings before I was asked, a slight pause, before your preference for privacy was established. "Before I told Remus to keep you out," Harry said pleasantly. "Yes." Dumbledore met his eyes. He was not going to pretend this was a normal conversation, Harry could see, he was too honest for that, at least in his way, which was a particular kind of honesty that didn't always produce the whole truth. "I understand the report from Healer Stroud's assessment has been filed." "This morning." Dumbledore nodded. The room was quiet. Hermione turned a page with a sound that was barely audible. Remus, by the window, was a contained and attentive stillness. "I'd like to explain," Dumbledore began. "I'm going to ask you some questions first," Harry said. "And I'd like you to answer them directly. Not with context and framing and historical perspective, just the direct answer, and then the context if you feel it's necessary. Can you do that?" Another recalibration. "I'll do my best," Dumbledore said. "Did you implant a soul fragment in me when I was an infant?" The question in the open air of the room was different from the question in parchment analysis. It had a different weight. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a moment, and Harry watched the man's face move through something that was genuinely painful before it settled. "Yes," he said. The word sat there. Harry had known it was coming. Knowing it was coming and hearing it were not the same thing, and something moved in his chest, not the fragment noise, that was gone, this was his own response, clean and particular and entirely his. He let it move and did not let it become anything on his face. "2 fragments," Harry said. "The analysis found 2 with your signature." Dumbledore's expression shifted, a micro-expression of surprise, quickly controlled. The second was uncertain, he said. I was not entirely sure it had taken. It took, Harry said. It was the oldest and the most integrated. The analysis characterizes it as a death tether. He watched Dumbledore's face. What was it meant to do? A pause. Longer than the first. The brightness in the old man's eyes had gone somewhere difficult. It was designed to ensure, Dumbledore said slowly, that at the critical moment, the moment of final confrontation with Voldemort, your magical core would behave in a specific way. That a particular outcome would be structured. What outcome? That your death, if it occurred, would produce the conditions necessary to destroy the part of Voldemort's soul that, he stopped. His hands tightened on his knee. That had taken up residence in you. The room took that in. You knew about the Horcrux, Harry said. Voldemort's accidental one. The piece of his soul that went into me when he killed my parents. I suspected it for some time. I became certain of it approximately 2 years ago. And your plan was for me to die. My plan, Dumbledore said, and his voice was careful now, precise, not deflecting but genuinely struggling with the weight of the words, was that you would be willing to walk into death when the time came. And that the tether would ensure the correct magical outcome. That your sacrifice would not be wasted. You were managing my death, Harry said. Planning it. Shaping it. With something you put in me when I was 1 year old, before I could consent, before I could understand, before I had any agency at all in a plan that was entirely about what my death would accomplish. I was trying to ensure that your death would defeat him, Dumbledore said. That it would mean something. That all of it, something cracked slightly in his voice, very slightly, the sound of a man who genuinely felt the horror of what he'd done and genuinely believed it had been necessary, and Harry understood that both of those things could be true simultaneously and that neither one changed what had been done, would mean something. The first fragment, Harry said. The guidance one. The one that influenced my decisions. Dumbledore was very still. What decisions specifically were you nudging? Harry asked. When I trusted you. When I followed your guidance without question. When I felt absolutely certain that you were right and that I should do what you said, how much of that was me, and how much was your fragment adjusting my intuition? The silence stretched. I never directed you to harm, Dumbledore said. Every influence was toward, that's not what I asked. Harry, how much of my trust was mine? Harry said. His voice was still even. Still factual. The evenness was not performance, it was real, it was the clean unencumbered reality of a mind that was entirely his own working on a problem with all its faculties present. Answer the question. Dumbledore closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them they were very old and very sad and very honest, which was the combination that made him simultaneously the most trustworthy feeling and most dangerous person in any room. Some of your trust was the fragment's influence, he said. I can't quantify what proportion. I would not, he stopped. Tried again. I would like to believe the majority was your own. You are, he looked at Harry, you have always had a deeply genuine nature. I believe your instincts toward trust and loyalty are entirely yours. What the fragment did was, he paused, reinforce them. Smooth the edges of your doubts. In particular moments when you might have questioned my guidance more critically. Moments when questioning you might have led me somewhere you didn't want me to go, Harry said. Yes. The word was barely audible. Second question, Harry said. Were you aware of any other fragments? Any other violations? Dumbledore's eyebrows came together. No. No, I was aware of Voldemort's original accidental fragment. The Horcrux. I was not aware of deliberate implantations from any other source. 14 of the 31 are Voldemort's, Harry said. Deliberate, post-Godric's Hollow, over 16 years. Someone named Algernon Croker is responsible for 5, built for Ministry intelligence purposes. An unidentified party implanted 1 for observation. 2 are yours. He let each number land. The combined effect of 31 foreign fragments suppressing my magical core since infancy has been, Stroud's team characterizes my actual magical output, now unencumbered, as Class Omega. Dumbledore looked at him. The scale doesn't go high enough to measure it, Harry said. The instruments broke. Something passed through Dumbledore's expression, surprise, then something more complex. Something that looked almost like awe and which Harry found profoundly irritating because the awe was partly the response of someone whose plan had not accounted for this, whose careful calculations had not included the possibility that the thing they'd been shaping and managing and directing all this time was rather more than they'd understood. Harry, Dumbledore said quietly. I need you to understand that everything I did, every decision I made, was, for the greater good, Harry said. I know. You've been saying that, in various forms, my whole life. He paused. Do you know the origin of that phrase? A pause. Dumbledore's jaw tightened slightly. Harry. Gellert Grindelwald's philosophy, Harry said. You shared it with him when you were 17. For the greater good. As justification for whatever the plan required, whoever the plan required it of. He held the old man's gaze. I'm not drawing an equivalence. I know you're not Grindelwald. But I want you to hear how it sounds when you say it to someone who has just had 31 violations of his soul catalogued and 2 of them are yours. I want you to hear what that phrase costs. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. I hear it, he said. I hear it clearly. And he looked like he did, like he was genuinely hearing it, the weight of a philosophy he'd spent decades believing in landing differently in this specific room. I am sorry, Harry. I know those words are insufficient. They are, Harry said. I'm not asking for apologies. I'm establishing what happened. What was done? By whom? On what grounds? He paused. What happens next is a separate question. What does happen next? Dumbledore asked. Stroud's report is filed. The legal process begins. The Ministry will receive documentation of Clause 18 violations with confirmed signatures. He paused. Your name is on that documentation. Dumbledore absorbed this with a stillness that was harder to read than it had been before. I see. I'm telling you because you deserve to know before it reaches them, not as a courtesy but because I want you to understand something. Harry leaned forward slightly. Not aggressively. Just closing the conversational distance. I am not doing this out of revenge. I am not doing this because I hate you. I don't, actually, which is more complicated and more honest than it would be if I did. He paused. I'm doing it because it happened. Because what was done to me was wrong regardless of the intention behind it, regardless of the outcome it was pointed toward, regardless of whether it was aimed at defeating the darkest wizard of our age. Wrong is not contextual. What you did was wrong. And the law that governs our world agrees with that assessment, and the law is going to do what it does. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. The brightness in his eyes was doing something Harry couldn't quite categorize, not calculation, not manipulation. Something more open than that. Something that looked like a man seeing another person clearly, possibly for the first time. You have grown into something extraordinary, Dumbledore said quietly. I had extraordinary things taken from me, Harry said. I grew into what I would have been without them. What was always mine. He paused. Don't credit yourself for it. The silence that followed that was not hostile. It was just true. Hermione, who had been silent throughout with a discipline that Harry knew was costing her significantly, turned another page. The sound was measured and intentional and it shifted the air in the room just slightly, a reminder that they were not alone in this and that someone in the room had an extremely detailed legal framework prepared and was ready to deploy it at any moment. There's something else, Harry said. Dumbledore waited. Voldemort's fragments. 14 of them. They're gone, extracted, dissolved. Whatever connection existed between us through that mechanism is severed. He paused. What that means strategically, you should understand, whatever advantage he had through that channel is gone. Whatever information he's been drawing from proximity to his fragments inside me, perception, emotional data, anything that was bleeding through, is gone. He knows that. He will have felt it happen. Dumbledore's expression shifted into the focused, strategic look that was his most honest face, Harry thought, the pure chess player underneath everything else. When did the extractions begin? Tuesday. Then he's had 3 days to feel them leaving. He will know something significant has occurred. He will not yet know what. He'll find out when the Ministry processes Stroud's report, Harry said. Which means we have approximately 24 hours before the information is potentially accessible to his Ministry contacts. Umbridge, Dumbledore said. Among others. Harry looked at him. That's your department, not mine. The Order can handle the containment. What I'm telling you is the timeline. He paused. I want to be clear about something, though. I'm not telling you this because I'm handing you the strategy. I'm telling you because you need to know, and because I'm choosing to tell you, not because you're entitled to the information. Something flickered in Dumbledore's expression. A recognition of the shift in the dynamic between them, laid out plainly and without apology. He had come in expecting grief or anger or need and had found none of those things, and the adjustment required was fundamental. I understand, he said. Good. Harry stood. He was taller than he'd been 3 days ago, not literally, but in every functional sense. I think we're finished for today. Dumbledore rose, slowly. He stood for a moment. There was something he wanted to say, Harry could see, the old man's mouth opened and closed once, some large and genuine thing trying to find words. Harry waited. I watched your parents die, Dumbledore said, finally. And I told myself that their deaths had to mean something. That the sacrifice had to be used. That wasting it would be the greater sin. He paused. I turned their son into an instrument. And called it protection. He stopped. I will spend the rest of my life understanding what that cost. Harry looked at him. Looked at the genuine grief in the old man's face, the real weight of someone who had been wrong in a profound way and knew it. He was 16 years old and he had just been through 3 of the most significant days of his life, and standing here, looking at Albus Dumbledore's honest face, he felt something that was neither forgiveness nor condemnation. Something quieter and more permanent. Good, Harry said. That's the right thing to spend time on. He opened the door. Dumbledore left. His footsteps went down the corridor and disappeared. Hermione was out of her chair before the door had fully closed. She stood in the middle of the room for a moment with her hands pressed to her mouth. Then she lowered them. That was, she started. Stopped. Started again. Harry, that was, how was the legal framework, he asked. Did I cover everything you prepared? She stared at him. Then she let out a breath that was mostly a laugh and somewhat a cry and entirely Hermione, and she shook her head. You were better than the legal framework, she said. I had good source material. Remus, from the window, said nothing. He was looking at the door Dumbledore had gone through, and his expression was the particular expression of a man closing a chapter, not happily, not unhappily, just finally. Tea? Harry asked. God, yes, Hermione said. The rest of the day moved differently. There was a post-extraction check with Stroud, who declared Harry's core integration complete and his status for discharge as ready, which produced paperwork and instructions and a follow-up appointment in 2 weeks. There was a conversation with the hospital's legal liaison, a small officiant which named Alderton, who explained the procedural path the soul fragment violation report would take and what Harry's rights were at each stage. There was a lunch that Harry ate all of in what Hermione said was becoming a concerning pattern of genuine appetite, and Harry said he'd been suppressed for 16 years and was making up for it. Fred and George arrived at 2 with a card from the Hogwarts student body that was the size of a small door, covered in signatures and well-wishes and what appeared to be an illustration of Harry playing Quidditch that Lavender Brown had drawn in excellent detail, and one section near the bottom where the Slytherin signatures were, present but small, and Harry looked at that section for a moment with something that was almost amusement. "Malfoy didn't sign it," George reported. "We left a space." "Pansy Parkinson did though," Fred added. "Her handwriting is huge. She signed it 3 times. In different colors," George said. "One can only speculate," Fred said. Harry laughed, and the laugh was clean and immediate and entirely unencumbered, and both Fred and George stopped and looked at him when they heard it, because it was different from the laughs they knew, lighter in a way that was nothing to do with volume and everything to do with what wasn't behind it anymore. "There it is," George said quietly. "There what is?" Harry asked. "The laugh you were supposed to have," Fred said. "Simply. Without any surrounding humor." Harry looked at them. At their matching faces with their matching expressions of something that was more complex than usual for Fred and George, who were masters of keeping the complex underneath. "I'm going back to school tomorrow," he said. "McGonagall's expecting you Saturday," Fred said. "She sent word. Tell her tomorrow." "She's going to fuss," George warned. "She can fuss quietly while I eat dinner," Harry said. The afternoon moved. Ron came back from wherever he'd been writing letters, Harry discovered, specifically to Percy, a long and apparently very honest one about what had happened that had taken several drafts and several hours. Ron was private about the details but mentioned it with the particular expression of someone who had done a necessary thing that had cost them. Harry nodded and didn't ask for more than Ron wanted to give. It was 4 o'clock and the light had gone golden through the window when Stroud knocked and entered with a look that said she had something to say and was organizing the approach. "The International Registry responded," she said. "Unknown B." The room went still. The fragment architecture and magical tradition match a specific practice used by, she looked at her parchment, a group of European magical historians. Specifically those affiliated with the Keepers of Records, which is an international body that monitors significant magical bloodlines and documents. She paused. "Exceptional magical events." "Exceptional magical events," Harry repeated. "The magical historians. They had a fragment inside me for 11 years because," he stopped. "Something aligned. Because they wanted to observe my development. Because they considered what happened at Godric's Hollow, a child surviving the killing curse, exceptional enough to monitor. The identification is compelling but not definitive," Stroud said. "The International Registry has flagged it for investigation." "They wanted a front-row seat," Ron said, from his chair, with a disgusted precision. "All these years. A front-row seat inside you. The violation is the same regardless of their intention," Hermione said, quietly but firmly, in the tone she used when she wanted something to be unambiguous. "Intent doesn't determine the criminality of a Clause 18 violation." "I know," Harry said. He filed the information with the others. "Named and counted." "All of them." "Are there any other unidentified signatures in the full analysis?" "No," Stroud said. "All 31 are accounted for. 14 Voldemort, 5 Croaker, 2 Dumbledore, 1 Keepers of Records, 9 remaining." She checked her notes. "Wait," Harry said. "I thought it was 9 Voldemort in the preliminary and 14 in the full analysis." "You just said 14. That's 22 of the 31 accounted for. 14 plus 5 plus 2 plus 1 is 22, Hermione confirmed. That's 9 unaccounted for." Stroud looked at her parchment. "The 9 remaining in the full analysis carry a signature I designated unknown C in my internal working," she said. "I didn't include it in my initial summary because the characterization is unusual enough that I wanted to be absolutely certain before presenting it." The room waited. "Unknown C is not a dark magical tradition," Stroud said carefully. "It doesn't match any registry entry, which is not surprising for its age. These 9 fragments are among the oldest group. But the magical characterization," she set the parchment down and looked at Harry directly, the magical characterization of these 9 fragments is not suppressive, not observational, not guidance-oriented. I've spent 3 days analyzing them and the closest description I can offer is protective, Hermione said. Stroud looked at her. How did you? Fragment 6, Hermione said, looking at Harry. The one that felt warm. The one Stroud called monitoring and guidance, attributed to Dumbledore. But when it came out you said it felt like warmth. Like butterbeer. And Dumbledore's guidance fragment would not feel warm, it would feel like influence, like pressure, and the others did. This one felt different because it wasn't Dumbledore's, Harry said. They all looked at him. He thought about the warmth. About the one fragment in 31 that had not felt like an intrusion when it left, it had felt like a departure, like something saying goodbye. He thought about what Stroud had said 3 days ago, standing in this room, like space that was always supposed to be yours. Those 9 fragments, he said. What kind of protective magic are we talking about? Characterize it. Stroud looked at her notes. Sacrificial in origin, she said. The 9 fragments all carry the trace of magic performed at enormous personal cost. Ancient, self-giving magic. The kind that, she paused and said the next part carefully, the kind that can only be cast by someone who chooses to give something of themselves without expectation of return. The room was absolutely quiet. My mother, Harry said. Stroud met his eyes. Lily Potter, Hermione said softly. The protection from her, her sacrifice. We always thought it was a general magical shield. A blood protection. But it was, she put pieces of herself inside him, Remus said. His voice was very quiet and very raw. To protect him. After she died. Not just a charm. Not just a residual effect. He stopped. She put herself in him. 9 of them, Harry said. Over the years following Godric's Hollow, Stroud said, quietly. Fragmentary protections, self-generated, post-mortem, which is extraordinarily rare magic, practically theoretical, she found a way, Harry said. The magic required would have, Stroud stopped. Started again. Soul fragment generation requires an act of extreme violence, usually, or extreme will in the case of self-sacrifice. Post-mortem generation, she shook her head. I don't have a framework for it. I don't think anyone does. She was extraordinary, Remus said. Just that. Just plainly and quietly. Harry was looking at the window. At the clear October sky. 9 of the wrong-colored stones in his core had been hers, his mother's, placed there by a woman who had died at 21 and found a way to keep protecting her son anyway, without his knowledge, without any possibility of acknowledgement or gratitude, just because she had loved him and the love had been stronger than death and had found somewhere to go. He sat with that for a very long time without saying anything. Nobody pushed him to say anything. When he finally looked back at the room, his eyes were bright. He didn't apologize for it. He didn't explain it. He just looked at the people in the room, Hermione with her hands folded, Ron with his jaw set tight against his own emotion, Remus who had tears he was not trying to hide, Fred and George very still in the doorway where they'd been since Stroud started talking, and he said, She saved me 9 times and I never knew it. You knew, Remus said. You've always known she saved you. You just didn't know how many times. Harry looked at him. Were the fragments painful? He asked Stroud. Hers. When they came out. Stroud thought back. They were, no. They were not painful. They felt, warm, Harry said. Yes. He nodded. He breathed. They're gone now, Hermione said gently. They dissolved. The protection was never in the fragments, Harry said. The fragments were just the expression of it. The love that made them, he paused, looking for words that were adequate and finding none quite right, that doesn't dissolve. He looked at his hands. I know that. The room was still. Outside, London went on being London, and the October light moved across the floor, and Harry sat in the full and unencumbered reality of himself, all 31 things gone, all 31 spaces now his mother's love named and counted among the things that had been inside him and the only one he was grateful for. He sat with it and let it be what it was, grief and gratitude so interwoven they couldn't be separated, which was, he supposed, what love usually came down to. After a while Ron got up and opened Fred and George's bag and distributed the treacle tart that had been sitting on the windowsill since morning. He handed Harry's piece to him without ceremony and sat back down and bit into his own. Fred and George came fully into the room and found chairs. Hermione accepted her piece and ate it. Harry ate his and it tasted exactly like it should, which was excellent, and he looked around at the people in the room and felt something that was not complicated at all. Stroud, at the door, clearing up her instruments, glanced back at the scene, 6 people eating treacle tart in the wreckage of a hospital room's diagnostic equipment, one of them the most magically powerful individual she had encountered in 23 years, and left them to it. At 5:30, Healer Alderton knocked and entered. She had a look that was professionally composed and privately alarmed, which Harry had come to recognize as the standard St. Mungo's expression when something administrative had gone sideways. "The ministry report," she said. "Yes," Harry said. There's been an irregularity in the processing chain." She glanced at her parchment. "The report was received by the Department of Magical Law Enforcement at 2 o'clock this afternoon as expected. By 3:30, it had been flagged for a hold by the office of the Senior Undersecretary. Umbridge, Hermione said. "The hold requests that the report be classified as a sensitive document pending internal ministry review," Alderton said. "Which in practice means she's trying to bury it," Harry said. "The legal mechanism for that hold is legitimate under certain narrow conditions," Alderton said carefully. "However, the hospital's legal obligation to file the report has been fulfilled. The hold does not erase the filing." "Can it be challenged?" Hermione asked. She was already reaching for her notebook. "Under Clause 22 of the Magical Medical Privacy Act, a patient who is the subject of a soul fragment violation report has the right to request a direct hearing before the Wisengamot if they believe the report's processing is being impeded." Alderton paused. "It's rarely invoked because it requires the petitioning party to appear personally and petition formally." "I'll do it," Harry said. Alderton looked at him. "The petition hearing would need to be scheduled. Schedule it as soon as possible," Harry said. "Tomorrow if they'll have it." "Monday is the earliest the Wisengamot can convene." "Monday, then." Harry looked at Hermione, who was already writing. "What do I need to prepare?" "I'll have it ready by Sunday," Hermione said, without looking up. "Everything. The full case, the legal framework, every piece of Stroud's analysis, the signature attributions, the Clause 18 implications. Everything." "I'll need to not be in hospital for Sunday," Harry said to Alderton. "You're technically cleared for discharge today," she said. "Then I'll be at Hogwarts by tomorrow morning." He looked at her. "File the petition request today. Get Monday confirmed." She nodded, wrote something, and left. Fred and George were looking at each other with an expression Harry knew well, the expression that preceded a very large, very coordinated plan. "Don't," Harry said. "We weren't," Fred started. "You were about to offer to do something dramatic." "Don't. This needs to be precise, not dramatic." He looked at them. "When the time comes for something dramatic, I'll tell you." George's smile had an edge to it. "We'll be ready." "I know," Harry said. Remus came to stand beside him as the evening settled into the room. Outside, the first city lights were beginning to come on, London shifting from its amber-grey afternoon into the particular quality of a Thursday evening, ordinary and unaware, the city doing what cities did regardless of what happened inside individual rooms. "Back to Hogwarts tomorrow," Remus said. "Yes. McGonagall will have things to say." "Let her. Snape will have things to say." Harry smiled. It had an edge to it too. "Let him." Remus looked at him sideways. Voldemort will be making moves, he said. He'll have felt the fragments going. He'll be reassessing. Good, Harry said. Let him reassess. Let him figure out what he's actually dealing with now. He paused. He spent 16 years with 14 pieces of himself inside me, and he never used that access to understand what I actually am. He thought the suppression was my nature. He looked out the window at the lights of London, quiet and very calm. It wasn't. Remus was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do? He asked. Not strategy, genuinely asking. Harry thought about Monday and the Wizengamot and Umbridge and Croaker and Dumbledore and Unknown Bee and Voldemort and 31 fragments and the 9 warm ones that had been his mother's love distributed through his core like light through glass. He thought about what it meant to stand in a room entirely his own, with a magical core that broke instruments, with a mind that was finally and completely quiet, with people around him who had spent 3 days choosing him without reservation. Everything, he said. Chapter 5. The hearing Friday morning at Hogwarts was loud in the way that only Hogwarts could be, the specific quality of 400 students all processing the same information through different emotional filters simultaneously, which produced a noise that was less like chatter and more like weather. Harry walked through the entrance hall at 8:15 and the weather happened to him. It started with a Hufflepuff third year who stopped dead on the staircase and stared, then whispered something to the girl beside her. Then a cluster of Ravenclaws near the notice board who went quiet in a way that was louder than talking. Then the general ripple effect of a room noticing something and trying to decide how to respond to it while also pretending not to notice, which was its own particular variety of noise. Harry walked through it. He didn't slow down, didn't look for reactions, didn't brace for the attention the way he usually did, that particular habit of making himself smaller in public spaces, of angling his head so his scar was less visible, of moving through crowds in the way of someone hoping to pass through undetected. That habit was gone. Not replaced by performance or display, just absent, in the same way that a splinter's absence is felt as ease rather than anything more dramatic. He was heading for the Great Hall and breakfast, and that was what he was doing. Ron was on his left and Hermione was on his right, and they were both doing the thing where they were aware of the room without engaging with it, a practice buffer that Harry appreciated without needing to acknowledge. Seamus Finnegan hit him like a fairly large and enthusiastic Labrador retriever approximately 6 feet from the Great Hall doors. "You're back," Seamus announced, as if this were information Harry might not have. "I am." "You look," Seamus pulled back and looked at him with the focused assessment of someone who had known a person for 6 years and was noticing something he couldn't name. "Different." "So I've been told." "Not bad different," Seamus added quickly. "Also something I've been told." Seamus was gesturing at Harry's general person with a hand that couldn't quite settle on what it was pointing at. "More of you. Like there's more of you than there was." "That's accurate," Harry said, and went in for breakfast. The Great Hall conversation dropped by approximately 40% when he walked in and recovered to approximately 70% over the following 30 seconds, which left a residual 30% that was clearly talking about him. He sat in his usual place, pulled a plate toward him, and started on eggs. Neville was already there and looked up with an expression that was warm and direct and contained no performance whatsoever. "How are you?" Neville asked. "Good." "Genuinely." Harry looked at him. "Stroud?" Neville shook his head. "Nothing," he said. "Clean scan. Nothing in my core that shouldn't be there." He paused. "She said my magical core shows signs of historic suppression at the environmental level, meaning something in my development environment may have been inhibiting my confidence and therefore my access. Not implanted. He searched for the word. The Dursleys did something similar to me before any fragments were even a consideration," Harry said. "Environment matters." "She said the same thing," Neville said. "She also said," a small pause, something crossing his face that was careful and new, "she said I'm significantly more powerful than my performance history suggests." "I know," Harry said. Neville looked at him. You knew before the scan. I've watched you do magic for 6 years, Harry said. Your herbology, your DA work, your instincts when things go wrong and there's no time to second guess. You're exceptional when the doubt isn't in the way. He went back to his eggs. It'll be more out of the way now. Neville was quiet for a moment, processing this with the thoughtful deliberateness he applied to significant things. Thank you, he said. For sending me to Stroud. Don't thank me. Go be excellent. Neville almost smiled. Working on it. Across the hall, the Slytherin table was doing something. Harry became aware of it in the way he became aware of most things now, not through looking directly but through the peripheral information that his newly unencumbered attention gathered without effort. Malfoy was watching him. Not the usual watching, not the calculated superiority or the reflexive hostility, something more uncertain than either of those. Malfoy was watching the way people watched things they hadn't expected and hadn't categorized yet. Harry looked at him. Malfoy looked away first. That was new. McGonagall appeared at his elbow before he had finished his second cup of tea, which was earlier than he'd expected and suggested she'd been watching the doors. My office, she said. When you're done. I'm done now, he said, and stood. Her office had the usual organized austerity of a space where every object had a purpose and was in its place. She sat behind her desk and he sat in a chair across from it, and she looked at him for a long moment with the particular McGonagall look, direct, rigorous, assessing, before she said anything. I've read Healer Stroud's report, she said. The copy sent to the school as Harry Potter's registered educational institution. I assumed you would. I want to ask you something and I want a direct answer. All right. Are you actually well, she said. Not medically. Not physically. Are you all right? He looked at her. At the question underneath the question, the one that was asking not about his capabilities or his status but about him specifically, the person, the student she had known for 6 years and watched carry things she hadn't fully understood. He thought about giving her the measured answer and decided against it. Yes, he said. More than I've been before, I think. The process of getting here was, he paused, significant. But yes. I'm all right. She held his gaze for a moment, the professional scrutiny softening into something more personal. Then she nodded, once, with the particular finality of someone who has asked their real question and received a real answer. Good, she said, and the word carried weight. Then she put both hands on her desk and looked at him with an expression that said the personal part was complete and now they were going to talk about the other thing. The ministry hearing. Monday. I'm aware. Alderton's office copied Hogwarts on the petition confirmation. She paused. You're planning to attend without legal representation. Yes. Harry, I'm not saying I don't need support in the room. I'd like you to be there, if you're willing. He met her eyes. You're a witness to 6 years of my educational development being impacted by magical suppression. You're also the deputy headmistress of this school and one of the most respected witches alive. He paused. Having you there means the Wisengamot can't treat this as a student's complaint. It becomes an institutional matter. McGonagall looked at him for a moment with an expression that was moving through several things in rapid succession. Then she said, I'll be there. Thank you. And Dumbledore? He knows about Monday, Harry said. What he chooses to do with that is his decision. She pressed her lips together in the way she did when she was holding back a specific opinion. He came to see me yesterday evening, she said. After his visit with you. Harry waited. He was, she paused, shaken. I have known Albus Dumbledore for 40 years, and I can count the number of times I've seen him shaken on one hand. She looked down at her desk for a moment. He told me what he'd done. The fragments. His fragments. She looked up. He told me the full truth of it, which I think he had not done before. Not completely. Not to anyone. How was that for you? Harry asked. The question surprised her, he could see it. She had been prepared for him to ask what Dumbledore had said, not how she had received it. Difficult, she said honestly. He is my friend and my mentor and a man I have respected profoundly for most of my adult life. And what he did was, she stopped. Her jaw tightened. I am not excusing it. I'm not asking you to. He believed it was necessary, she said. He was wrong. Those are both true. Yes, Harry said. They are. She looked at him with something that was close to bewilderment. How are you this, she gestured. This steady about it? He was manipulating your decisions, Harry. He put a tether in you two. I know what he did, Harry said, quietly. I've had 4 days to understand it. I'm steady about it because being unsteady doesn't help and because I'm going into a Wisengamot hearing on Monday and I need to be the clearest person in that room. He paused. And because I understand the difference between knowing the truth and having the emotional space to process it, and right now is the time for knowing the truth. McGonagall looked at him for a long moment. Whoever you were becoming, she said, the fragments were in the way. Yes. I'm glad they're gone, she said, with a quiet ferocity. Every single one of them. He almost smiled. Me too, Professor. The weekend moved with a purpose that felt specific and forward. Harry attended his classes on Friday, which produced a second round of the entrance hall effect in each classroom, every professor doing a rapid visible recalibration as they registered the quality of Harry's attention and the nature of his questions, which were no longer the working through interference questions of someone reaching further than they expected to need to but the direct, complete engagements of someone present in a subject. Professor Flitwick nearly levitated himself in charms when Harry's first attempt wand work produced results 3 times more precise than his previous best. Potions with Snape was its own distinct experience. Snape did not do a double take. He was not the double take type. What he did was deliver his opening remarks with his usual controlled contempt, set the class to work on their potions, and then, walking the room, stop beside Harry's workstation for longer than he stopped anywhere else. Harry felt him there and kept working, because the potion needed attention and Snape's scrutiny was not a reason to stop. The potion was, objectively, better than anything Harry had produced before, the cutting was cleaner, the timing was exact, the color at the 17-minute mark was exactly what the instructions called for. Snape said nothing for a long time. Then, quietly enough that only Harry heard, "Your mother was an exceptional potion student." Harry looked up. Snape had already moved on. It was not an acknowledgement. It was not warmth, not anything that could be mistaken for approval. It was a piece of information delivered in the specific way of someone who had held it for a long time and released it because the moment required it, and Harry understood it for exactly what it was. He looked back at his potion. I know, he said, to the workstation, quietly. And meant it differently than he would have 4 days ago. Saturday afternoon Harry spent in the library with Hermione constructing the Wisengamot case. This was, in practice, Hermione doing the detailed architectural work while Harry engaged with each component as she produced it, challenged the framing, and rebuilt parts of it in the places where precision was more important than coverage. They worked well together in this mode. Hermione was magnificent with the structure and Harry had developed, in 4 days of having his full mind available, a particular instinct for the essential point in any argument, the load-bearing piece that everything else either needed to support or was padding around. Clause 18, Section 4, Hermione said, reading from her parchment. Willful implantation of a soul fragment into a non-consenting magical being constitutes a class A sorceress violation and carries mandatory sentencing of not less than a life term per fragment upon conviction. The "upon conviction" is the key phrase, Harry said. We're not in a criminal proceeding Monday. We're in a petition hearing. What Monday is for is establishing that the report's processing was improperly impeded and that the report's contents justify formal investigation. The criminal proceedings come after. Right. Hermione made a note. The petition therefore needs to do 3 things, establish that the processing hold was illegitimate, demonstrate that the report contains prima facie evidence of multiple Class A violations sufficient to mandate investigation, and, she paused. And be compelling enough that the Waisengamot can't quietly shelve it after we leave, Harry said. Yes. The public record aspect. Whatever happens in that hearing becomes part of the official Waisengamot record, which is not classifiable, Harry said. Umbridge can hold the ministry report. She can't hold the Waisengamot record. Hermione looked at him with the expression she had when a plan was working properly. That's why you wanted Mondays specifically. The full Waisengamot sits on Mondays. If we'd gone on a Thursday it would be a panel hearing, smaller, quieter, easier to suppress. Monday it's the full body. He paused. I want every vote recorded. She turned her parchment over and started a new page. Who do we know on the Waisengamot? Dumbledore is Chief Warlock. I don't know what he'll do Monday. He thought about it. I don't need to know. I'm not factoring his participation in either direction. He looked at the table. Madame Longbottom. Hermione wrote the name. She's influential. She's also Augusta Longbottom, and if she reads what was done to me she'll be thinking about what might have been done to Neville. He paused. I'm going to send her the analysis parchment tonight. Hermione looked up. You're briefing her in advance of the hearing. I'm making sure the right people are informed. That's different from lobbying. He met her eyes. Isn't it? She considered. Technically, she said. Yes. A petitioner may share factual information with any Waisengamot member in advance of a hearing. What they may not do is request a specific vote. She paused. Are you going to request a specific vote? No, he said. I'm going to give her the facts and let her draw her own conclusions, which will be the correct ones because she's Augusta Longbottom and she reads a situation better than most. Hermione almost smiled. When did you get like this? You keep asking me that. Because the answer keeps being more impressive. He turned a page. Keep going. What's the procedural sequence for a petition hearing? They worked until dinner, and after dinner Harry wrote the letter to Augusta Longbottom, direct, factual, complete, with the analysis summary attached. He wrote letters to 2 other Waisengamot members he knew, Griselda Marchbanks, who had examined him at OWLS and whose opinion of him was demonstrably not governed by ministry politics, and Tiberius Ogden, who had resigned from the Waisengamot in protest during the previous year and whose return had been on record since September. He sent all 3 by school owl with a flag that said they were time-sensitive and not to be routed through ministry channels. Sunday was preparation and rest in proportions that Hermione managed with the attentiveness of a project manager whose project was Harry's well-being. He trained in the morning, an hour in an empty classroom working through what he could do now with his full capacity available, which was genuinely remarkable and which he approached with the focused interest of someone learning the specifications of a piece of equipment they'd just been told was considerably more advanced than the manual described. Wandless magic came as easily as breathing. He could feel the magic not as something he accessed but as something he was, as constant and fundamental as his heartbeat, and directing it was not effort but attention, pointing and awareness, and the world responded. He kept it measured. He kept it quiet. Not out of hiding, but because mastery was more interesting than display, and he was finding the edges of what he could do with precision rather than with force. The Patronus he cast at the end of the session lasted 6 minutes without refreshing the spell. When Hermione found the stag still running bright circles around the empty classroom, she stood in the doorway and watched it for a moment before looking at Harry. How long? She asked. Since I started it. Without refreshing. Without thinking about it, he said. It's just, there. It doesn't cost anything. She was quiet. The stag moved between them, bright as daylight. I want to ask something, she said. Ask. The tether. Dumbledore's oldest fragment. Stroud said it was designed to activate at the moment of your death. Near Voldemort, mortal harm. She paused. It's gone now. The mechanism he built is gone. Yes. Which means the plan he had, whatever the plan required of you, doesn't have a mechanism anymore, Harry said. Yes. Does that worry you? Not about Dumbledore's plan. About what it means for, she gestured, the larger picture. The Horcruxes. The final confrontation. All of it. He thought about it honestly. The stag moved through a shaft of morning light and dissolved at the wall, and Harry let it go without refreshing it. No, he said. Dumbledore's plan was his plan. It was built on assumptions about what I could and couldn't survive, about what my magic would and wouldn't do, about what I was fundamentally capable of. He looked at her. Those assumptions were all wrong. His plan was designed for a suppressed version of me. A version that had 31 things pressing down on what he actually was. He paused. That version doesn't exist anymore. And the version that does exist? He looked at the empty classroom, at the sunlight, at the space. Is going to figure it out, he said. Differently. On his own terms. She looked at him for a moment. Then, good, she said, with the firm, forward-facing conviction she reserved for conclusions that were important enough to require absolute certainty. That's the right answer. Monday arrived. They arrived at the Ministry of Magic at 9:15, Harry, Hermione, Remus, McGonagall, and Neville, who Harry had asked specifically because Neville standing in a room and being seen standing in a room sent a particular message about what this case was connected to. Ron came as well, independently, without being asked, because Ron was Ron and the idea that he would stay at school while something important happened to Harry was not a concept that could survive contact with Ron's actual personality. The atrium was doing its morning business around them, ministry workers flowing through in both directions, the golden fountains doing their gleaming work, the general atmosphere of institutional purpose. Harry walked through it the same way he'd walked through the Hogwarts entrance hall, present, unhurried, taking up exactly the space he was entitled to. The Wizengamot chamber was accessed through a set of doors on the 4th floor that required a formal petition token to open, which Alderton had arranged. The doors were heavy and old and opened with the particular solemnity of a space that considered itself important, which the Wizengamot chamber absolutely was, with its tiered rows of wooden seats and its central floor and its ceiling that went up further than seemed architecturally justified. The seats were filling. The full Wizengamot, 50-some members, witches and wizards in their plum robes, were taking their places in the tiers with the morning efficiency of people who attended these sessions regularly. Harry walked to the central floor and stood at the petitioner's position, which was a specific marked spot, and looked up at the assembled body with the particular clarity of someone who had no performance to maintain. Dumbledore was in the Chief Warlock's chair. He looked at Harry when Harry looked at him. Neither of them did anything particular with the look. It was simply acknowledgement between two people who had already said everything essential. Umbridge was in the 4th row, 2nd seat, wearing pink robes. She looked at Harry with the expression of someone who has prepared extensively for a situation and is confident in their preparation. He looked back at her briefly and moved on. Augusta Longbottom was 3 rows up on the left. When Harry's gaze found her, she gave a nod that was barely perceptible and entirely definitive. Marchbanks, beside her, had her reading spectacles on and a parchment in her hand that looked very much like the analysis summary Harry had sent her. Ogden, further along the row, had the expression of a man who had read something that confirmed a long-standing suspicion. The session opened. Dumbledore, as Chief Warlock, led the procedural formalities with the precise authority of someone who had done it 1,000 times and did not need to think about it. Harry waited. His patience was a clean thing. It had no anxiety in it. Petition hearing, Monday the 22nd, Dumbledore said. Petitioner Harry James Potter. The petition challenges the processing hold placed on a soul fragment violation report filed by St. Mungo's Hospital on Thursday the 18th. Mr. Potter, you may present. Harry looked up at the chamber. Thank you, he said. He didn't use the formal address. He addressed the room the way one person addressed other people, directly, without procedural distance. Several members in the upper rows shifted slightly. On Tuesday the 15th of October, I collapsed during a Quidditch match at Hogwarts and was transported to St. Mungo's for emergency assessment, he said. The assessment found 31 illegally implanted soul fragments in my magical core. They ranged in age from 6 months to 16 years. On Friday the 18th, healer Miriam Stroud filed a soul fragment violation report with the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, as required by law. That same afternoon, a processing hold was placed on the report by the Office of the Senior Undersecretary. He let that sit for a moment. "I'm here to establish 3 things," he said. First, that the hold was illegitimately placed. Second, that the report's contents justify immediate formal investigation under Clause 18. Third, that this body has a legal and moral obligation to ensure the report is processed without further obstruction. He paused. "I'll take them in order." The hold was illegitimate because Clause 27 of the Ministry Administrative Procedures Code specified the narrow conditions under which an undersecretary could apply a sensitive document hold to a medical report, and none of those conditions were present in this case. Harry cited each condition, cited the statute, and demonstrated the absence with the precision of someone who had spent Saturday afternoon with the best legal mind of his generation going through it point by point. Several Wisengamot members were writing. Umbridge was very still. "The report's contents," he said, and looked up at the tiers. 31 soul fragments. All illegally implanted without consent. The sources, 14 attributed to Lord Voldemort. 5 attributed to Algernon Croker, former head of the Unspeakables. 2 attributed to, he paused, not for effect but because he wanted to say this next part with complete accuracy, Albus Dumbledore. The chamber was not quiet. 30-some voices all doing something in the same instant produced a particular quality of sound, not shouting, not gasping, something more like the simultaneous realignment of 30-some people's understanding. Harry waited for it to settle. He did not look at Dumbledore. He did not need to. 1 attributed to an individual associated with the international body known as the Keepers of Records, he continued, when the room had settled. And 9 attributed to my mother, Lily Potter, post-mortem, in the form of protective soul fragments that she placed deliberately and at significant personal cost to defend her infant son from mortal harm. He paused. "I want the record to reflect those 9 separately from the others because they were not a violation. They were an act of love, and the person who performed them is dead and cannot speak for herself, and she deserves to have the distinction made clear." The chamber was absolutely quiet. 22 fragments constituting Clause 18 violations, he said. 22 counts, minimum, under a law that prescribes life imprisonment per count. He held the chamber's attention without effort, because what he was saying was true and the truth had its own gravity. The violators include a Dark Lord, a former ministry official operating in an intelligence capacity, an international archival body operating without authorization, and one of the most respected wizards alive. He let that land. "None of them asked me. Not one. In every case the assumption was that I was available, that my body, my magical core, myself was a resource that could be accessed and utilized for someone else's purpose without my knowledge or consent." He looked around the chamber. "I was 1 year old when the oldest fragment was implanted," he said. "I was 16 when I found out they existed. The collective effect of 31 foreign soul fragments suppressing my magical development from infancy produced a false assessment of what I am and what I'm capable of, an assessment that has informed every decision made about me, and around me for my entire life." He paused. "That stops today. What I'm asking this body to do is simple: process the report that the law requires to be processed. Order formal investigation of all identified violators. And establish formally, in the record of this body, that the processing hold was illegitimate and that the delay in establishing this investigation is noted." He stopped. The chamber processed him. "Questions?" Dumbledore said, into the quiet. Several hands went up. The questions ranged from procedural to technical to, from a witch in the upper left who Harry didn't know, deeply personal in a way that was not prurient but genuinely concerned. He answered each one directly. The technical questions he handled with Hermione's framework, which was comprehensive and rigorous. The procedural questions he handled with the statute references. The personal question, what would you like the outcome of the formal investigation to be? He answered with, the outcome of the law applied consistently, regardless of who the violator is. That's all. Umbridge raised her hand. The senior undersecretary, Dumbledore said. She smiled. It was the smile Harry had hated for a year and a half and which now landed with approximately the same emotional weight as drizzle. Thank you, Chief Warlock, she said, in the voice that was pink and sweet and carried poison underneath. I have a procedural observation. She looked at Harry with the expression of someone who has arranged something. The petitioner is a minor, 16, Harry said. Indeed, a minor, and as such any medical decisions made on his behalf, were made by me, Harry said. I was the consenting patient. Healer Stroud confirmed my legal right to make my own medical decisions under the Magical Medical Privacy Act at age 14 and above. Nevertheless, the report itself, Dolores. He said her name without any prefix or any hostility, just her name, plainly. The plainness of it in a formal proceeding was somehow more arresting than volume would have been. The processing hold you placed has no legal foundation. I've just demonstrated that to this body in some detail. Continuing to reference procedural observations that don't address that central fact isn't going to help your position. He looked at her steadily. Would you like to address the central fact? The chamber was very quiet. Umbridge's smile remained. I'd like to note, she said, that the petitioner's attitude in this chamber, the petitioner's attitude, Augusta Longbottom said, from the third row, with the kind of authority that had spent 80 years becoming entirely comfortable with itself, is that of a young man who has just told this chamber that he had 31 illegal magical violations performed on his person, some since infancy, and is requesting that the law be applied. I for one find the attitude entirely appropriate. She looked at Umbridge over her spectacles. Would you care to explain, Dolores, under what specific provision of the administrative code you applied the hold? Specifically, not procedurally. The specific clause. Umbridge was still smiling. The smile was doing harder work than it looked capable of. The report was flagged as potentially sensitive given the identities of the named violators, Section 14, Subclause B of the Code, Marchbank said, from the seat beside Longbottom, reading from her parchment, specifies that a sensitive document hold may only be applied when the report's subject matter constitutes an active security risk to the Ministry. A completed medical extraction is not an active security risk. The relevant violators are no longer present in the patient's body. She looked up. The hold was invalid the moment it was placed. She looked at Umbridge. Which I suspect you knew. Umbridge maintained the smile by sheer force of will. Harry watched her. He watched the calculation happening behind her eyes, the assessment of the room, the reading of the members, the measuring of how far her position had eroded in the last 20 minutes. He had seen the same calculation in smaller contexts, in the corridors of Hogwarts, in detention rooms, in the particular politics of a person who had always relied on institutional power and was now in a room where the institution had turned around and was looking at her. I'm prepared, Umbridge said carefully, to revisit the hold in light of the procedural discussion. I'd like to call a vote, Ogden said. The vote on removing the processing hold was 41-7. The 7 who voted against it Harry didn't need to catalogue in the moment. He noted them, filed them, moved on. 41 was more than enough. The hold is lifted, Dumbledore said. The report is returned to active processing in the DMLE. Formal investigation of all identified violators is mandated under Clause 18. He paused. The Chamber will note for the record that this investigation includes a named citation of 2 violations attributable to myself. Silence. I will be recusing myself from any further proceedings related to this matter, Dumbledore said. And I would like to state, for the record, that the petitioner's account is accurate and the violations occurred as described. Another pause, barely perceptible. I am sorry. The chamber processed that. 40-some witches and wizards who had spent their careers operating in a world that Albus Dumbledore anchored sat with the sound of him saying I am sorry on the official record of the Wizengamot. Harry watched their faces. He watched the architecture of certainty rearranging itself in real time across 50 expressions. He felt nothing triumphant about it. He felt, instead, the quiet specific clarity of someone who has named a true thing in a room that matters, and the naming has done exactly what naming is for. Is there anything further from the petitioner? Dumbledore asked. One thing, Harry said. Dumbledore waited. The 9 protective fragments attributed to Lily Potter, Harry said. I'm requesting that they be formally documented in this body's record as non-violatory, distinguishable from the Clause 18 violations, and characterized as what they were, an act of maternal protection performed at the cost of her own soul's integrity by a witch who had no other means of defending her child. He paused. She deserves the formal record to say what she did. Her name and what it meant. The chamber was quiet in a way that was different from the other quiets, softer around the edges. So noted, Dumbledore said, and his voice was not quite steady. Formally entered. Harry nodded. That was it. That was the hearing. They walked out into the ministry corridor and the door closed behind them with its heavy solemnity, and for a moment none of them spoke. Hermione had her arms crossed, not in displeasure but in the way of someone holding themselves together because they'd been very precisely controlled for 2 hours and the precision had cost something. Ron was pale with the particular pallor of someone who had been holding their breath and had only just remembered not to. Neville stood with his shoulders straight and his chin up and his expression settled. Remus looked at Harry. Your mother would have, he started. I know, Harry said. They stood in the corridor while ministry workers moved around them, ordinary business flowing past in the way that ordinary business always kept moving regardless of what had happened in the room it was flowing past. Harry felt the morning's work inside him, not exhaustion, not relief exactly, more like the feeling of a thing completed. Named and counted. Formal and permanent now, in the record. Tea, he said. Good God, yes, McGonagall said, with a feeling. They were in the Atrium Café, a small, genuinely undistinguished place that nonetheless served very good tea, when the silver tabby Patronus landed on the table between them. McGonagall's own, and she looked at it with the expression of someone receiving professional information in a personal setting. What? Harry asked. The Patronus spoke in a voice that was Dumbledore's, quiet and very clear, Harry. Voldemort has moved. 3 Death Eaters were stopped at the ministry entrance this morning, 40 minutes ago. He knows you're here. He sent them for you specifically. Aurors are handling the current situation but you should know, he is reassessing. He knows you're different. He will come for you himself when he understands what different means. Be careful. The Patronus dissolved. The cafe continued its ordinary business around them. Harry drank his tea. 3 Death Eaters, Ron said. He felt the fragments leaving, Harry said. He knew something changed. He sent scouts. He put his cup down. He doesn't know what yet. He'll figure it out. He looked at Remus. Tell the order. Already, Remus had his wand out. Tell them also that I want to meet with them this week. Not to be briefed. To brief them. He looked at the table. They've been operating on incomplete information about me for 16 years. That changes. Moody is going to have things to say, Ron said. Moody is welcome to say them, Harry said pleasantly. And then I'm going to show him what a Class Omega magical core looks like in a training room, and after that I don't expect further commentary. Neville made a sound that was mostly suppressed laughter. Hermione was looking at the spot where the Patronus had been. He's coming, she said. Eventually. Directly. Yes, Harry said. Are you worried? He thought about it honestly. About Voldemort, about 14 fragments that had been inside him for years and were now gone, 14 anchors severed, 14 pieces of information flow cut. About a Dark Lord who had spent 16 years operating on the assumption that he understood his greatest threat, whose understanding had been based on a suppressed, incomplete, artificially limited version of that threat, and who was now operating in the dark. No, Harry said. Good, Hermione said, and it was the same word she'd used before, but it landed differently now, with the specific weight of someone who had been afraid on his behalf for 4 days and had arrived somewhere solid. We should get back to school, McGonagall said. She had her professional composure fully reassembled, the moment of genuine emotion in the corridor apparently allocated the appropriate space and now filed away. You have a transfiguration essay due Thursday. Harry looked at her. The world continues, Mr. Potter, she said, with the particular dry affection that was as close as McGonagall got to warmth in a professional setting. And so do your academic responsibilities. I have a 3-foot essay on switching spells, Harry said. 4 feet, she said. I increased the requirement on Friday. You were in hospital on Friday. I'll extend your deadline to Saturday. She stood. Shall we? He stood. Around the table, people gathered themselves, tea finished, coats straightened, the general reorganization of a group preparing to move. Ron was doing something with his scarf. Neville was putting a notebook away. Hermione was, inevitably, already thinking 3 things ahead of the present moment. Remus was at the door, his coat collar turned up against the weather. Harry picked up his bag. Through the cafe window London was doing its Monday thing, grey and busy and entirely unconcerned with Wisengamot hearings or soul fragment violations or the formal naming of a dead woman's love in an official record. A bus went past. A pigeon sat on the window ledge for a moment and left. A man in a coat walked very fast in the direction of something that was probably a meeting he was late for. Harry watched it for a moment. All the ordinary things going on regardless. He looked down at his hand on the strap of his bag, his hand, his bag, his choice to pick it up. His decision to move. His morning, his hearing, his case, his words, his mother's name on the record. All his. He went through the door. Chapter 6, What he carries now. 3 weeks after the hearing, Hogwarts had settled into the particular routine of a place that has absorbed a significant event and decided to keep going. The corridors were the same corridors. The staircases moved the same unpredictable ways. The food appeared at breakfast and dinner and the owls arrived in the mornings and the October cold had given way to November grey, which was its own specific quality of weather, heavier, quieter, the kind that pressed against the windows and made the castle feel enclosed in the best possible way. Harry was in the training room he'd commandeered in the East Wing by 7 every morning, and he was there again now, and the room had learned to expect him. He wasn't working on anything specific. He was working on everything, which was different, moving through his entire magical range the way a musician moved through scales, not to perform but to know, to understand the full territory of what he was. The wandless work had become so natural it had essentially stopped being a category. His magic was simply available, completely and constantly, the way his hands were available, the way his mind was available. He used the wand because it produced more precision in some applications, not because it was necessary. This morning he was practicing something he'd started working on 4 days ago, simultaneous multilayered spellwork, holding 3 separate active spells at different levels of complexity while maintaining a 4th as a constant background. The theory was established: most advanced magical practitioners could hold 2 simultaneous spells at the cost of significant concentration. 3 was considered extraordinary. Harry was on 4, and finding the ceiling of it, and the ceiling appeared to be considerably higher than 4. He was holding a protego across the full room, a suspended aguamenti producing a controlled column of water in the corner, a levitation charm on 11 stones in complex overlapping figure eights, and a warming charm on the floor underneath his feet, when the door opened and Hermione came in. She stopped. Looked at the stones. "Good morning," Harry said. "That's 11, she said. 12 if I include the door," he said. The door swung shut behind her without him looking at it. She walked to the wall and sat on the bench he'd put there, which she and Ron had started using as a viewing position. She had her notebook out before she'd fully sat down. "I have news," she said. He let the stones down gently, one by one, in order of size, and ended the other spells in the reverse order he'd started them, and turned to face her. "Good news or complicated news?" "Complicated news that has good elements," she said, which was essentially her personal signature. Croaker. He sat on the bench beside her. "Go on." "The DMLE completed their preliminary investigation," she said. "Stroud's evidence was apparently comprehensive enough that they moved faster than anyone expected. Algernon Croaker was arrested on Wednesday. The charges are 5 counts of Class A sorceress violation under Clause 18. She paused. "He's not denying it." Harry looked at her. "He's not denying it." "No. Apparently when the Aurors brought him in he told them immediately that he would cooperate fully in exchange for the investigation being handled in-house rather than referred to the international body." She glanced at her notes. "He wants to explain himself." "To who?" She met his eyes. "To you." The silence was brief. What was his explanation to the DMLE? That the 5 fragments were part of a classified unspeakables monitoring program dating from 1982. That the program was sanctioned at the departmental level under provisions that have since been, his word, retired. That the intention was never suppression, never harm, specifically protective intelligence gathering around the only known survivor of the killing curse. She paused. "He says he believed he was acting legally." "He wasn't, but he believed it." "He believes institutional sanction makes a difference," Harry said. "Yes. He's wrong about the law on that point. Individual accountability under Clause 18 is explicit and non-transferable. But he's not wrong that the decision wasn't entirely his alone." She looked at her notebook. "He named 4 other individuals in the department who knew. 2 of them are dead. 1 retired to France. 1 is still active." "The one still active?" "The DMLE has them." She paused. "Harry, Croaker is, I've read the full interview transcript, which Alderton obtained for us. He's not what I expected. He's 73. He spent 40 years believing that exceptional magical individuals required surveillance and active monitoring for the good of the wider community. He's genuinely convinced he was doing necessary work." "He's genuinely wrong," Harry said. "Yes. But it's not the same kind of wrong as Voldemort's fragments. It's institutional wrong. The kind that builds up over decades inside organizations that forget that the people they're monitoring are people." She put her notebook down. "What do you want to do about the meeting?" He thought about Algernon Croaker, 73, 40 years of classified work, convinced of the rightness of a program that had put 5 pieces of its methodology inside a child without asking. He thought about the particular quality of institutional wrongness, the way it was harder in some ways than individual evil, because it was so thoroughly convinced of itself, so thoroughly embedded in procedure and precedent. "I'll meet him," he said. "Not because I want his explanation. Because I want him to have to give it to my face." Hermione nodded. "Wrote something." "The keepers of records responded to the International Registry inquiry," she said, moving on with the efficiency of someone working through a list. "And? They've acknowledged the fragment. They've categorized it internally as a passive observation protocol relating to the documentation of the Godric's Hollow incident, which is what they're calling the night your parents died." Her voice went flat. "They're treating it as an archival decision rather than a violation. They argue the fragment was non-interactive and non-harmful." "They argue incorrectly," Harry said. "Yes. The International Registry has been notified and the case is being referred to the International Confederation of Wizards for adjudication." She paused. "The keepers they're not small, Harry. They're well-connected and old and they're going to have legal representation that's very good." "Fine," Harry said. They can have legal representation. The law doesn't change because the violator is old and connected. He looked at the window. What's the timeline? 6 to 8 months for the international process. All right. He filed it. Voldemort, she said. He turned back to her. No direct movement in 3 weeks, she said. The Order has been monitoring. There have been Death Eater incidents. She checked her notes, 3 disappearances, 1 attack on a Muggleborn family in Yorkshire that Aurors contained, a break-in at Borgin and Burke's that the DMLE are treating as Voldemort connected. But nothing directed at you specifically since the Ministry attempt. He's thinking, Harry said. Remus thinks so too. He felt the fragments leave. He lost 14 channels of whatever information he was drawing from my proximity to them. He knows something fundamental changed and he doesn't know the scale of it. Harry stood and moved to the window. The grounds were grey and still, frost on the grass, the lake a flat pewter sheet. He'll move when he thinks he understands what he's dealing with. The Ministry attempt was a probe. 3 Death Eaters to take me in that venue was never a serious operation, it was information gathering. He wanted to know if I was vulnerable. You weren't there when it happened, Hermione said. No. Which told him something. And the hearing told him more. He'll have read what was in the Wisengamot record by now, through whoever he has in that building. He turned from the window. He knows the fragments are out. He knows I petitioned the Wisengamot and won. He doesn't know yet what I am now. He paused. He'll come when he thinks he's ready. I need to be ready first. The Order meeting is Thursday, Hermione said. At Grimmauld Place. I know. She looked at him for a moment. They're not going to all take it well. I know that too. He moved toward the door. What time is breakfast? She checked her watch. 7:45. Then we have time. He paused with his hand on the door. Hermione. The unknown B fragment, the Keeper's one. Before it was extracted. Was it actually causing any harm? Stroud's characterization of it was passive observation. She was quiet for a moment. No direct harm that Stroud could identify, she said. It wasn't suppressive. It wasn't guidance-oriented. It was just, watching. Then why does it bother me most, he said. Not asking for an answer, just noting. Hermione looked at him. Because someone decided that watching you without asking was neutral, she said. They decided your experience of being watched didn't matter as long as the watching didn't leave marks. She paused. That's a particular kind of disregard. He held her gaze. Yes, he said. Exactly that. He opened the door. Breakfast. The corridor outside was beginning its morning population, students moving toward the great hall and the particular loose flow of people still waking up, conversations half-started, robes not yet fully settled. Harry moved through it and the corridor did its thing, that adjustment, the slight widening of paths, the sideways glances. He'd stopped noticing the noticing. It was background now, not something he needed to manage. Ron fell into step beside him at the top of the main staircase, appearing from the direction of the dormitory with his tie not yet done up and his hair doing 3 separate things. Training again, he said. Every morning. How's that going? I held 4 simultaneous active spells this morning. Ron was quiet for a moment, running the numbers. Yes. Does it get easier or harder as you go up? Neither, Harry said. It stops being a question. Like asking whether breathing is hard. Ron looked at him sideways. You know, 6 weeks ago you couldn't reliably produce a Patronus on demand. The suppression was heaviest there, Harry said. The Patronus draws from the core directly. The fragments that were most actively suppressive, Voldemort specifically, targeted the deep core operations first. Because a strong Patronus would have been a problem for him, yes. Ron absorbed this. So all those years when you struggled with it, was him, Harry said. Mostly. Not entirely, it's a genuinely difficult piece of magic. But the ceiling on it was artificial. They arrived at the great hall doors and Ron stopped, which Harry noticed only because he was several steps ahead before Ron's footsteps stopped. He turned. Ron was standing in the corridor with his hands in his pockets and the expression he made when something was bothering him and he was trying to find the right way to say it. "I need to say something," Ron said. "Say it." Ron stopped. "Tried again. I keep thinking about second year. When you were in the hospital wing after the basilisk. And you were so pale and you'd lost so much blood and I was sitting next to the bed and Dumbledore was there, and I was so relieved because Dumbledore was there and I thought, he'll sort it, he's Dumbledore, he'll make it right." He paused. "And now I know that the person I was relieved to see was the person who'd been, Ron. I'm not looking for you to reassure me," Ron said, quickly. "I know it's not about me. I'm saying it because," he looked for the word, "because I need you to know that when I was relieved to see Dumbledore I was wrong, and that I'm not going to be relieved to see someone automatically anymore just because they have authority. I'm going to think about it." He looked at Harry. "That's all." Harry looked at his best friend standing in the corridor with his tie knot done up and his hair in several directions, making a quiet personal commitment that he'd apparently been working toward for 3 weeks and had found the moment to say. "That's everything, actually," Harry said. Ron shrugged, like it was nothing, which meant it was a great deal. They went in for breakfast. The week moved. Defense against the dark arts with Professor Sable, a replacement Umbridge had not been able to prevent after the hearing, when 3 parents and the Board of Governors had jointly filed a review that had resulted in her removal from the Hogwarts oversight role, was a different experience now than it had been in September. Sable was competent and direct and gave Harry genuine material to work with, and the class had the quality of a room where everyone was actually learning, which was what it was supposed to feel like. The dueling club Sable ran on Wednesdays had become the most attended optional activity in school, partly because of the quality of the instruction and partly because Harry attended, and watching Harry duel was, as Seamus said with complete accuracy, educational in the way that being near lightning was educational. He didn't show off. He was precise, controlled, and he used every duel to practice the simultaneous casting work he was developing in the mornings. He was also, without planning it, teaching people by example, because the fastest way to show someone what was possible was to do it, and 3 students who watched Harry hold a shield charm against 4 opponents while simultaneously doing something quiet and decisive with his left hand had gone away afterward and practiced their offhand wand work until their shoulders ached. Neville was one of them. Neville had, in the 3 weeks since the hearing, undergone his own quiet transformation that Harry watched with the particular satisfaction of someone who had done one useful thing that had compounded. The diagnostic had done something for Neville that was not medical but psychological, had given him a framework for understanding the gap between his understanding of magic and his access to it, had let him name the environmental suppression as a thing that had happened to him rather than a quality inherent in him, and the naming had done its work. He was producing magic now that matched his genuine comprehension, which was considerable. Sprout had stopped Harry in the corridor on Wednesday to tell him, with the beaming enthusiasm of a woman watching her best student bloom, that Neville's herbology had moved into a different category entirely. "He knew all of this," she said. "He always knew it. I could see it. He could see it. It just wouldn't come," Harry said. "And now it does," she said. "What did you say to him?" "I just sent him to someone who could tell him what was actually true," Harry said. "He did everything else himself." She beamed. He kept walking. Thursday came and with it the order meeting. Grimmauld Place received them at 7 in the evening. The house was the same dark, complicated space it had always been, Sirius's house, which still felt like Sirius's house regardless of the legal status, which still had that particular quality of a place held in time by grief. Harry moved through the hallway past the covered portrait and into the kitchen where the order had assembled, and he felt the house around him with the specific attention of someone who was more aware than he used to be and noticing things that had always been there. The order was, Remus, Moody, Tonks, Kingsley Shacklebolt, the elder Weasleys, McGonagall, Mundungus Fletcher who fell asleep in meetings and thus counted approximately as furniture, Bill Weasley, Charlie Weasley who had come from Romania, Hestia Jones, Daedalus Diggle, and 3 other members Harry knew by sight. They were arranged around the long kitchen table in various states of readiness, some with tea, some with parchment, Moody with his magical eye doing its usual full-room surveillance that now, Harry noted, kept returning to him. Harry sat at the table without being directed to a seat. Ron and Hermione took positions on either side. Neville was there because Harry had asked him to be, and the slight surprise in several faces at Neville's presence was something none of them vocalized, which was the right call. Right, Moody said, before anyone else could set the agenda. Let's see it. Several people looked at Moody. Moody was looking at Harry with his magical eye doing its sustained unblinking focus. You've been at school for 3 weeks producing readings that the Ministry's ambient monitoring is flagging as anomalous. I've been getting reports from the field that every ward within a half-mile of Hogwarts has strengthened since your return. And you put on a performance at the Wisengamot that Longbottom, he meant Augusta, described to me as the most composed petitioner she's seen in 40 years. He paused. Let's see what we're actually dealing with. Alastair, Remus said, with a mild warning in it. No, it's fair, Harry said. He looked at Moody. What specifically do you want to see? What you can do. Now. At the table? You've got better things to do. Harry considered. The kitchen was a long room and the table occupied most of it, but there was space. He reached out without looking and extinguished all 8 candles in the overhead fixture simultaneously. The room went dark. Then, one by one, with precise control, he relit them, not from the wand, not reaching toward them, just relighting them in sequence, left to right, until the room was fully lit again in the same time it had taken to darken it. Then he put a shield charm across the entire room, full, impenetrable, the kind that would hold against every spell at the table without requiring attention to maintain it. It's up, he said. Try it. Moody fired a stunner at him immediately, without warning, at full power. It hit the shield and dissolved without resistance. He fired 2 more in rapid succession. Same result. He tried a cutting curse. The shield absorbed it with the same effortless quality. That's costing you something, Moody said. Everything costs something. Not as much as you'd expect, Harry said. He let the shield down. What else would you like to see? Moody looked at him for a long moment with both eyes now, the magical one having gone still. Several people at the table were very quiet. Molly Weasley's hands were folded on the table. Kingsley was watching with an expression that was carefully controlled and deeply attentive. Bill and Charlie were leaning forward in a way that was identical despite different contexts of experience. You're different from what we planned for, Moody said. He said it as a fact, not a complaint. I know, Harry said. Every strategy we've built assumes a certain level, I know that too, Harry said. Which is why I'm here. The strategies need updating. He looked around the table. Everything the Order has been doing has been based on an understanding of me that was built on false data. 16 years of false data produced by 31 fragments suppressing my magical development. That data is gone. What you're looking at now is what you're actually working with. He paused. I want to tell you what that means practically, and then I want to hear what the Order's current intelligence is, and then I want us to build something that accounts for reality rather than the modified version of it. He looked at Moody. Is that acceptable? Moody stared at him. Then he sat back and something shifted in his ravaged face that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to it, the expression of someone who had spent decades preparing for worst cases and had just found out the worst case was significantly better than expected. Talk, he said. Harry talked. He was specific. He covered his magical capacity, his assessment of his own strengths, the areas where he was still developing, the rate of that development. He covered what the fragment removal had changed and how, not as a boast, as a technical briefing, the way he'd have wanted to receive the information if the situation were reversed. He talked about Voldemort's 14 fragments and what their removal meant, the severed information channels, the loss of the proximity bleed that had given Voldemort access to impressions and emotional data through the fragment connection, the fundamental change in what Voldemort knew about his primary threat. "He's blind," Kingsley said. "To you specifically. He's been operating with that channel open his whole campaign. Everything he knows about your responses, your instincts, your power level, is outdated," Harry said. "Some of it never applied to me, it applied to the suppressed version." "He won't know that," Tonks said. "He'll still be working from the old model." "Yes. For a while." Harry looked at the table. "When he comes, and he will come, directly, eventually, he's going to be operating on assumptions that are wrong in almost every relevant respect." He paused. "That's an advantage. It's probably our biggest one." "Your biggest one," Charlie said, from the end of the table. Harry looked at him. "You're the one he'll come for," Charlie said, not unkindly. "When he comes directly. It's going to be you." "I know," Harry said. "Are you ready for that?" The table was quiet. Harry thought about Voldemort, about the reality of him, the intelligent and terrible reality of a man who had unmade himself in pursuit of immortality and had been doing damage for decades and was not someone to underestimate regardless of what advantages had shifted. He thought about it honestly. "Not yet," he said. "I'm getting there. I have probably 3 months before he has enough information to make a direct move, based on what we know of how he gathers intelligence. 3 months is enough to be ready." "Ready how?" Moody asked. "Ready completely," Harry said. "Not ready to survive an encounter. Ready to end it." The word end sat in the room. Several people absorbed it in their own specific ways, Molly Weasley pressing her lips together, Bill looking at the table, Remus very still in the way he went still when something was both right and hard. "The Horcruxes," Hermione said. "We haven't," she looked at Harry. "We're going to talk about that with Dumbledore," Harry said. "Separately. This week." He looked at the order. "Some of you know about the Horcruxes. Some of you don't. After we've spoken with Dumbledore and established the full picture, the order gets briefed completely. Nothing held back." He looked at Moody. "Information hoarding is how people get killed. That stops." Moody made a sound that was probably agreement filtered through decades of contrary habit. They were at the table for 2 hours. In those 2 hours Harry did something he hadn't done before in any context, he argued. Not defensively, not reactively, but actively and forward-facing, pushing back on plans that didn't account for current realities and proposing alternatives and expecting to be challenged on those alternatives and refining from the challenge. Moody challenged him 3 times. The 3rd time produced the most useful plan revision, which Harry noted and filed as data about the value of Moody's specific kind of opposition. Kingsley was thoughtful and strategic and 3 times offered insights that shifted Harry's thinking in ways he hadn't expected. He'd underestimated Kingsley, he realized, had known he was good without quite registering how good. He made a note to himself to spend time with Kingsley specifically. Tonks was funny and precise and had a way of finding the practical gap in any abstract plan that was invaluable. She also kept reflexively doing small metamorphmagus adjustments when she was thinking, her hair cycling through 3 colors in the course of one particularly complex discussion, and Harry watched it with the focused interest of someone noting that involuntary magic expressed differently in different people. At 9 the meeting closed. People dispersed into the house's various corners or out the front door into the dark street. Harry stayed at the table for a moment after most of the room had cleared, just sitting, letting the evening settle. Remus sat beside him. "How was that?" Remus asked. "Useful," Harry said. "Really useful. Kingsley especially. He's been doing this work for 15 years. I know. I should have been talking to him like this for longer." He paused. "Information hoarding. Dumbledore's model, Remus said carefully. Yes. Among others. Harry looked at the table. It kept me manageable. Manageable is what you need when you're running a strategy that depends on a specific piece moving where you point it. He paused. I don't move where someone points me anymore. Remus looked at him. That makes you harder to protect. No. It makes me harder to manipulate. There's a difference. He met Remus's eyes. I'm better protected by people who know what I actually am and are planning around reality than by people who are planning around a managed version of me. He paused. This week changed that. Remus nodded slowly. He was quiet for a moment. Your father would have loved that speech, he said. Stop comparing me to my father, Harry said, but there was no edge in it, just the mild exasperation of the familiar. Your mother's instincts, Remus said. Your father's nerve. You're rather unfair. Harry stood. Tea before I go back. Always. They made tea in Sirius's kitchen and drank it at the long table, and the house was quiet around them, all the ways it held Sirius, all the ways it held the order, all the ways it held the history of people who had sat in this room trying to hold back the dark. Harry felt the weight of it without being crushed by it. It was just true. Things had happened here. People had been here. The past was in the room the way the past was in everything, and you carried it forward or you didn't, and he intended to carry it forward. Thank you, Harry said. For the port key. For being at the hospital. For all of it. Don't, I know. Minimum standard. Harry looked at him. It wasn't. Remus held his gaze. No, he admitted. I suppose it wasn't. He went back to Hogwarts late, 10:30, which was past curfew but which Filch chose not to engage with, possibly through some complicated instinct about the night's particular energy. Harry walked the corridors and the castle was dark and familiar and enormous, and the magic of it, the ambient magic of centuries of spells and wards and enchantments layered into the stone, was something he'd always been aware of but felt differently now. Like a conversation he could almost follow. He went up to the astronomy tower instead of the dormitory. He did this sometimes now, went up when sleep wasn't immediate, stood in the open air with the castle below and the grounds below that and beyond the grounds all of the dark and light of the night. He could feel the wards from here, the layered protective enchantments that Hogwarts ran on, some of them centuries old, some newer, and they were doing their work with the particular quiet efficiency of magic that was very old and very settled. He stood there and let his magic move outward in the way it did when he wasn't directing it, not extending it deliberately, not doing anything with it, just letting it exist at its full natural range, which was considerable and which he was still charting. The wards registered him and adjusted slightly, making a small accommodation the way well-designed magic made accommodations for significant new presences, and he felt the adjustment and understood that the castle, in its ancient and non-sentient way, was acknowledging that something had changed. He thought about Voldemort. He thought about it with the clear, honest attention he gave to serious problems, not with fear, not with false confidence, just with the focused evaluation of someone taking accurate stock. Voldemort was intelligent, experienced, powerful, ruthless, and possessed of a magical capability that had taken him to the furthest point of dark magic practice in a century. He was also, now, operating on wrong assumptions about his primary threat, had lost 14 channels of information, and was increasingly isolated by his own methods. He was making tactical moves because the strategic picture was changing and he hadn't caught up to it yet. He would catch up. He wasn't stupid. But catching up would take time, and while he was catching up the ground would shift further. The Horcruxes were the work. Harry had been thinking about this since the fragments had come out, about what Dumbledore had told him in careful and incomplete segments over the years, about what Hermione had pieced together from the research, about what the logic of it required. There was one Horcrux he didn't have the location of. One known one that was somewhere he hadn't yet identified. And there was the question of whether the accidental one, the piece of Voldemort's soul that had attached itself to Harry at Godric's Hollow, counted now that the fragments had been removed. He knew the answer to that last question already. Stroud had addressed it, carefully, in the last post-extraction consultation. The accidental Horcrux was distinct from the fragments and remained. It was old and integrated in a way that made it different from the implanted fragments. It was still there. It was the conversation he needed to have with Dumbledore. He turned from the tower railing and went back inside, down the stairs, through the dark corridors, back to the dormitory and the sleeping sounds of his dormmates, and he lay in his bed and looked at the ceiling and thought about what he was carrying now. Not 31 foreign things. Not the noise, not the suppression, not the ceiling. Not the guidance fragment nudging his trust into certainty. Not the death tether pulling him toward a predetermined end. He carried his mother's protection, which was not a fragment anymore but was still somewhere in the fundamental architecture of how he had survived things that should not have been survived. He carried his father's nerve, which Remus had named accurately and which was his. He carried 6 years of friendship that had been tested by everything and had held. He carried the specific grief of a life that had started in loss and continued in varying degrees of it, and the specific resilience of someone who had lived inside that grief long enough to understand it wasn't the whole story. He carried the hearing and the record and his mother's name in the Wisengamot's parchment, permanently. He carried Neville's straight shoulders now in a corridor. He carried Stroud's steady voice saying this matters. He carried Remus drinking tea at a kitchen table and not making it into more than it was. He carried himself, finally and completely. It was enough. It was more than enough. He was almost asleep when the dormitory window vibrated. It was not the wind. It was not a branch. It was a targeted magical pulse, the kind used by someone who wanted to alert a specific person in a building from outside it without alerting anyone else. Harry was out of bed with his wand in his hand before the vibration had fully faded, all his sleep weight gone in an instant, his magic present and ready with the immediacy it had now, the zero-latency response of something that wasn't being suppressed anymore. He crossed to the window and looked out. The grounds were dark. The lake was still. The trees along the edge of the forbidden forest were their usual motionless dark shapes. Nothing. He looked harder. Let his attention extend outward the way it did from the astronomy tower. Let the castle's wards give him what they were registering. There. At the edge of the forbidden forest. A magical signature that was cold and large and wrong in the specific way of magic that had spent decades unmade and remade in the pursuit of the permanent. Not a Death Eater. Not a probe. The signature was too large, too direct, too present. Voldemort was at the edge of the forbidden forest. Not attacking. Not advancing. Just there. Standing at the boundary where the castle's wards began, where the protective enchantments met the wild magic of the forest, at a line that held him out. Standing there at whatever the hour was, 2 in the morning, maybe 3, just present, feeling the wards, feeling what was inside them. Feeling Harry. Harry stood at the window and felt him back. He was not afraid. There was no fear anywhere in the response, not hidden, not suppressed, not managed down into something acceptable. Just absent. What was there instead was that clean, clear attention, the same attention he'd brought to the Wisengamot, the same he brought to the training room, the same he'd had in the hospital bed with Stroud's parchment in his hands. The full and undivided presence of someone who understood exactly what he was looking at. Voldemort stood at the forest's edge and felt what was in the castle, and what he felt was not what he had expected to feel. Harry could tell. He could tell because the signature shifted, a tiny adjustment, a recalibration that the distance and the wards shouldn't have allowed him to read, but he read it clearly. Voldemort had come to take a measurement. He'd come to assess from a distance what the changed wards were registering, what the ambient magical field around the castle was now, what his 14 removed fragments had left behind. He had come expecting to find something diminished, fragments removed, connection severed, the diminished baseline of a target that was easier to read without the fragment signal noise. He had found something else entirely. Harry felt the moment Voldemort understood that his model was wrong. Not what the correct model was, just that the wrong one was wrong. The signature at the forest's edge went very still, the way things went still when the person they belonged to was doing rapid and serious recalculation. Harry touched the glass of the window. He didn't cast anything. He didn't throw a ward or a signal or a provocation. He simply let his magic be present at the glass, fully and without limit, the way sunlight was present at the glass, not aggressive, not careful, just completely itself. At the forest's edge, Voldemort stood absolutely still. Then he was gone. No dramatic exit, no flash of light. Just the absence of the signature where the presence had been, as clean as a door closing. Harry stood at the window for a moment longer. He felt the wards settle back to their baseline, the slight alertness of the castle's protective magic returning to its normal watchful patience. He felt the night go back to being just the night, cold, quiet, the grounds empty and silver under what light the clouds let through. He went back to bed. He lay down. He wasn't shaking. His heart was not racing. His scar, for the first time in his memory, for the first time he could remember with a clear unencumbered brain, did not hurt. Voldemort had been at the boundary of the most powerful protective structure in Britain at 2 a.m. and he had reached through the wards and felt Harry Potter and had left. That was information. That was very significant information. He let it settle. He let the night be quiet around him. He thought about what 3 months of preparation looked like given what he now knew. He thought about the Horcrux conversation with Dumbledore, which needed to happen this week. He thought about Kingsley and what Kingsley's 15 years of field experience could teach him that the training room couldn't. He thought about Neville's straight shoulders and whether Neville was ready and whether ready was something you ever fully arrived at or whether you just got close enough and then went. He thought about his mother at Godric's Hollow, young, 21, standing between her son and something she couldn't stop, finding in the last moments a magic that no one had documented, no one had theorized, no one had thought possible. Putting 9 pieces of herself into her child and calling it protection. He thought, she was right. Not just that the protection had worked, he'd known that. But that she had been right to do it, right to trust that love in that form meant something, right to believe that what she was putting in him would matter even if she wasn't there to see whether it did. Right that it would carry him. It had carried him. 16 years, 9 pieces, through everything. Through the Dursleys and the fragments and the suppression and the manipulations and the plans that had been made over and around and through him as if he were a variable rather than a person. Through all of it. Her love had been in him the whole time, quiet and warm, and it had been enough to carry him to here. Here, which was, the real thing, finally and completely, standing in his own full capacity in a castle where the stones knew his weight, with a mind that was entirely his and a magic that was entirely his and a life that was, for the first time, entirely his to decide what to do with. He thought about what he was going to do with it. He was not going to go looking for Voldemort. He was not going to be aggressive or reckless or driven by the need to prove something to himself or anyone else. He was going to finish school, learn what he needed to learn, build what needed to be built, let Hermione research and Ron stabilize and Neville grow into his power and Remus grieve into something useful and the Order operate on accurate information. He was going to find the last Horcrux and understand what Dumbledore knew about the one that was in him and have that conversation without flinching and figure out what came after it. And then, when Voldemort came, directly, completely, as he would come, as he had always been going to come, Harry would be there. Not as an instrument of a plan designed for a diminished version of him. Not as a symbol or a weapon or a chosen one in the sense of something that had been chosen for him without consent. But as himself. Harry Potter, Class Omega, his mother's love and his father's nerve, 6 years of friendship and 4 days of becoming, the whole undivided unencumbered truth of what he had always been underneath everything that had been piled on top. He would be there, and he would end it, and it would be on his terms. He closed his eyes. Sleep came immediately and completely, the way everything came now, without effort, without resistance, without 31 things making noise in the space between intention and rest. In the morning there would be breakfast and classes and Hermione with new research and Ron doing his quiet faithful thing and Neville getting better daily and all the ordinary work of a life that was his. In a few weeks there would be the Order and Dumbledore and the Horcrux conversations and the long strategic preparation for something that was coming whether or not it was prepared for. In some number of months there would be Voldemort at a boundary that wasn't a ward and a confrontation that had been building since the night at Godric's Hollow. But that was later. That was the horizon. Right now there was sleep, and the castle quiet, and November pressing gently against the windows, and Harry Potter, all of him, nothing missing, nothing foreign, the whole complete and extraordinary thing, resting in the dark. The last thing he was aware of before sleep took him completely was the wards. The castle's old protective magic, centuries deep, holding its watch in the way it always had. He felt it around him like a held breath, patient, thorough, attentive. And for the first time he felt it recognize him back. Not adjust to accommodate. Not register and file. Recognize. The way something old and deep recognizes a thing it has been waiting for and finds it, finally, exactly as large as it was always supposed to be. He slept.